In the summer of year 894 of the imperial calendar, magnificent celebrations filled the streets of the empire, as fireworks lit up the sky and the cheers of the people echoed everywhere, sending endless applause to one person. All those crowds had gathered for the hero of the empire, whom they called the Saint, expressing their love for her and pleading for her to look their way. Citizens carried banners expressing their overwhelming emotions, describing her as an angel, and joy filled their hearts because they finally had the chance to see her. That hero was none other than a saint possessing breathtaking beauty and divine power. Looking out at her admirers who never stopped chanting her name, this saint was Rowella Brita, who was thinking to herself that what she had been told was just a minor event, so she expected a modest ceremony. But she was shocked by this massive parade that also included a carriage procession. While in the carriage, she mockingly wondered if this scene was some kind of amusement park, which prompted the man sitting opposite her to chuckle softly, unable to restrain himself. Rowella looked at him with resentment, realizing he was intentionally teasing her with his laughter, then addressed him by the title, "Your Highness." That man was Hildian Kairos, the crown prince of the Kairos Empire, who politely apologized to her for his laughter. The crown prince explained that he couldn't resist because her reaction was so cute, then handed her a piece of paper, and she looked at it wondering what it contained. The paper bore a childish drawing. The prince told her that a child had given it to him with a bouquet of flowers, saying he had spent his whole day drawing it while thinking of someone, and Rowella inwardly commented that the drawing looked like a steamed bun. But something about the drawing seemed familiar to her, as the hood and blue eyes sparked her. Confusion and surprise. She soon realized with great shock that the drawing was supposed to be of her, which the prince confirmed while stifling his laughter, adding that this style of drawing had recently become popular in the empire, and there was a belief that hanging a drawing of the saint's face at home brings good luck. Rowella was infuriated by the idea of being turned into a good luck charm, so she crumpled the paper in her fist, thinking that this drawing was closer to bringing bad luck than blessings. She sighed in despair, admitting that she couldn't understand people's hearts, and she completely lost interest in the parade, wanting nothing more than to return home. Her greatest wish at that moment was to wash her feet and go to sleep. But suddenly, a mysterious blue window appeared before her carrying a hidden quest, ordering her to respond joyfully to the cheers of her loving citizens, with a warning demanding she wave her hand. Otherwise, she would face a penalty of decreased reputation. She felt resentful, cursing the appearance of that window again, but she understood the command directed at her. Resignedly, she acknowledged what she had to do and announced that she would execute the assigned task. Indeed, she waved her hand to the crowds, who erupted in shouts of joy at her response, while Rowella sighed inwardly, wondering if they were happy now, as she was told that making them happy was her duty. Her action triggered a wave of happiness among the people, as someone noted with celebration that she had kept the drawing, while others praised her kind heart. This scene inspired others, so they began wanting to deliver their feelings and drawings to her as well, folding them into paper airplanes. Soon the saint found her carriage raining with paper airplanes, so she looked out the window thinking regretfully that this noisy daily life was never what she had wished for. All she ever wanted in her life was simple, a place to lie down and the ability to buy whatever food she craved without worrying about tomorrow. But now she wondered how things had become so complicated. She traveled back in her memory to her previous life, which could be summarized as a life destined to end by working until death. She recounted to herself how her debt-ridden parents had abandoned her and left her with her grandmother, only to later find herself inheriting a massive debt, turning her life into a constant struggle to earn money for survival. When she turned 17, her grandmother, who was her only refuge, passed away, leaving her completely alone without even giving herself a chance to grieve. She had to toil to pay off her father's debts and secure her living expenses. Working 2 jobs was normal, and 3 jobs was easy. As a result, she dropped out of school and couldn't even dream of attending university. Even after becoming an adult, the situation didn't improve. Instead, her life became busier, and she constantly wondered how long this struggle to pay off the debt would continue. She remembered how she was working in a store, feeling so sleepy she could die, wondering why she was extra exhausted on that particular day, and if there was a single joy in that miserable life. But she decided not to give in to boredom. In the absence of customers, she saw it as a suitable opportunity to read a novel, certain that today was the release date of the new chapter. The only pleasure in her life was reading romance novels, specifically one titled The Lily That Bloomed in the Field Does Not Cry, a novel that sat on the throne of first place on free novel sites and was famous for being a glaring example of ridiculous and frustrating stories. Although most comments showered it with insults, its unexpected and exaggerated events made it hard to stop following, especially since it was free, which made her wonder excitedly about the big surprise awaiting her in the new chapter. She hoped that Hildian, the main hero who rarely appeared, would get some screen time today, but she was surprised by a shocking sentence announcing that Hildian had met his end alone, and that this was the end. She was stunned by the word end that suddenly appeared before her, and she didn't comprehend what happened. She refused to believe that this was the real ending of the novel, so she laughed hysterically, trying to convince herself that the author wouldn't kill the main hero so simply. But a notice from the author confirmed the disaster, thanking readers for their love for the novel, then revealing that the true hero wasn't Hildian, but another character named Demos, announcing that the novel would return for a second season after reorganization. She exploded in anger, feeling as if the author had deeply insulted all the readers, and she wondered indignantly how he dared to do that. She shouted, denouncing this sudden ending and rejecting the idea that the hero she followed wasn't the real hero. The shock reached a point where her heart beat violently, and she felt severe dizziness and an urge to vomit. She realized that what she was feeling wasn't just amazement, but that something was wrong and that it might actually be an emergency. No sooner had she thought that than she fell to the ground as the world went black before her eyes. When she regained consciousness, she found herself transformed into Rowella Brita, one of the characters in that novel. Rowella Brita was the noble and only daughter of the esteemed Brita family, a saint born after receiving a divine prophecy. Or rather, she was believed to be the saint. But when the true saint, Sylvia Astian, appeared, Rowella's falsehood was exposed, and she turned into a villainess in the story. Rowella screamed in shock as she realized her new fate, wondering how she could be the fake one. As stated in the novel, Rowella, driven by shock and burning jealousy, began torturing Sylvia. In the end, Rowella committed a sin she should have never committed. She put poison in Sylvia's food. Naturally, Sylvia did not die thanks to her privileges as the protagonist. While Rowella was imprisoned on charges of attempted murder of the saint, Rowella was screaming from behind bars that what happened was an injustice. She kept shouting that she was deceived too, and that what was given to her was presented as just a laxative. Rowella was a foolish villainess, so foolish she couldn't distinguish between poison and stomach medicine. Even though she insisted she was wrong, no one listened to her. She had lived long with her bad temper, and thus she found herself completely alone behind bars. Before she could even think about her past life, the curse of the former hero Hildian broke loose, and Rowella was swept away in the chaos, meeting a miserable death in prison. That was the end of Rowella, the character she was now reincarnated as. A week after waking up in Rowella's body, she was still trying to grasp her new reality while feeling pain. At first, she didn't believe she was reincarnated as a character from a novel with such a twisted plot, so she made a huge fuss like a madwoman. But eventually, she somewhat accepted the matter. She realized that at least she died and woke up again, and no matter how much she tried to think, this reality wouldn't change. Rowella thought with a cunning smile that, regardless of everything, she was now a wealthy and beautiful girl born with a golden spoon in her mouth. She had worked hard in her previous life and died without spending any of her money, so she decided that now, since the opportunity had arisen, she would enjoy the life of luxury and idleness she had been denied. In fact, Rowella was just an ordinary girl until the true saint appeared, and fortunately for her, the novel was full of illogical loopholes. So, she believed that if she lived quietly and kindly without drawing attention, she wouldn't face any problems. She devised a perfect plan. As soon as the true saint appeared, she would immediately confess and relinquish her position to her. This way, if she isolated herself quietly, pretending to heal her sorrows with shopping and food, she could safely exit the original plot's path. She pictured an isolated life in a mansion overlooking the ocean and decided she would enjoy this new life to the fullest. But suddenly, a blue system window appeared before her, identifying her as Rowella Brita, and the user as Kim Hyun-ju, her name in her previous life, and confirming the completion of her possession and synchronization with the new body. She screamed in terror, wondering if this was some kind of game, as she thought she was just a character reincarnated in a novel. The window welcomed her and announced that she would begin quests for Rowella's final ending. And the first quest was titled, I am a villainess, but I will be reformed by force, with a warning demanding she raise her reputation to at least 70 before acknowledging Sylvia as the true saint. She was furious at the villainous reformation quest, considering it nonsense, and announced that she didn't need reformation and that she could simply give up everything, relax, and enjoy her time. But the window responded directly to her thoughts, explaining the reason she couldn't simply give up. The reward for success in the quest was survival, while the penalty for failure was death within 6 months after Sylvia is revealed. She froze in place, shocked by this threat which she considered complete nonsense. Thus, she found herself, the villainous Rowella, forced to raise her reputation to 70 before Sylvia's appearance. And then she realized something serious about that system window. She realized with shock that this system window knew everything about the original story's events. Currently, she was the official saint, and no one knew yet that Sylvia was the real one, as that was a fact supposed to be revealed later. This made her wonder anxiously about what this system window was. Then she went back and read the penalty again, feeling terrified by the word death. She had just finished setting her perfect plan to live a long, luxurious, and comfortable life in a mansion overlooking the ocean. She was very angry because they were telling her now that she would die if she failed this random quest, and she almost unleashed her tongue with insults. But before she did, a new quest appeared titled Watch Your Language, teaching her that kind words are better than hurtful insults and suggesting she use euphemisms. The quest explained that using profanity would lead to automatic filtering or a reputation penalty, then offered her two options to agree, yes or I would love to, with a heart symbol. She looked at the two options with disgust, considering them lowly choices that didn't grant her true freedom of choice. She tried to calm herself, convincing herself that this must be a dream, as there were no system windows in the original novel, and she wondered what the final ending she was supposed to achieve was. The window responded to her thoughts again, displaying information about the final ending, but it was full of incomprehensible blanks, leaving her confused. She felt the window was reading her thoughts and answering them, but the abundance of blanks made it seem like a technical glitch, so she decided she might ignore the whole thing. But a red flashing notification appeared, confirming that she must choose, and that the quest window wouldn't disappear until she did, so she realized there was no escape. She sighed in resignation and decided to choose one of them since she had no other choice. And although she didn't understand what the profanity filter was, she saw that choosing the option with the heart symbol might be better. But before she could touch the option, a bright light flashed, making her recoil in surprise, shouting that she hadn't touched it yet. Roella wondered in shock if the system automatically selected the option the moment she thought about it. Indeed, a new window appeared announcing the activation of the Watch Your Language quest, indicating that all profanity would henceforth be subject to this status effect. She sighed in despair in her room, upset by the idea of monitoring her tongue, feeling that this request was beyond the capacity of any 21st century modern person, and wondered in confusion what she should do. In the meantime, she heard a knock on the door before it suddenly burst open, and a maid stormed into the room, asking her angrily what she had been doing all this time. That maid was Charlotte, her personal attendant, who scolded her for staying in bed even though the sun had risen high in the sky. Roella inwardly remembered that this was indeed her maid. Roella remembered how Charlotte had seemed short-tempered from the first moment she saw her, and that her condition hadn't changed today. But this situation seemed like a perfect opportunity for Roella. She saw in it a field to test the system window that was still visible before her. She called out to Charlotte and asked her if she could see this thing she was pointing to. Charlotte was puzzled by her talk, wondering what she was speaking about, which confirmed to Roella that the system window was visible to her alone. After finding the answer to her first question, she decided to move to the next, testing the filtering feature. She called Charlotte again with a smile, and the maid met her with resentment. When she tried to curse her with a profane word, her mouth was forced to utter the words, "I love," instead, so she was shocked and covered her mouth in a state of bewilderment. Roella realized with horror that the filtering feature was actually working and couldn't believe what happened. She realized she was in big trouble, especially when Charlotte asked her what she had just said. If the system window's functions were real, this meant the penalty for not completing the quest was real too, and she would actually die as she had seen before. But she wondered in confusion about the nature of this filtering and how an insult like, "Are you crazy?" could turn into, "I love you." Realizing this feature was very dangerous, Charlotte sighed, asking her mistress if she had truly lost her mind. Then she added that she was afraid Roella would get into trouble later, so she thought she was pretending to be crazy. Justifying that being subjected to a large sum of money scam was enough to drive anyone crazy, she reassured her not to worry. Then Charlotte approached to reveal that the fact she was scammed was a secret only she knew in the palace, and that she was ready to keep her mouth shut forever as long as Roella provided her with some pocket money. Roella froze as she grasped the threat, and then she realized she might have already fallen victim to a scam by someone named Organ Siebert. She remembered the story of Organ, whom she met through Deimos, the man she had a crush on. Organ had wooed her before revealing his true intentions. He offered her an investment opportunity in a mine he claimed contained precious materials, promising to triple her amount. Because of her trust in Deimos, Roella didn't bother to check Organ and fell into the trap of his sweet words. In an attempt to impress Deimos, she secretly used her father's name to guarantee the investment funds. But the result was Siebert's betrayal and his escape with the money. She didn't learn until later that he had been expelled from his family registry due to his gambling addiction. Rowella couldn't tell anyone what happened. She felt ashamed and afraid because she had been scammed several times before, and her father was the one who always bore the burden of her debts. The Duke had warned her last time that he would stop supporting her financially if she invested recklessly again, and now that she had caused another incident, she was sure he wouldn't tolerate her this time. Moreover, there was another person who should never discover this matter: Demos. That person was Demos Killian, Rowella's one-sided love and the true hero of the original story. Demos had persistently approached Rowella and shown interest in her. He showered her with sweet words and gifts, even though these things were just trivial favors in his eyes. However, they were not so for Rowella. But once he realized Rowella had fallen in love with him, his attitude towards her changed completely. He began exploiting her feelings, questioning how much she loved him and why she hesitated to invest her money for him. He kept reminding her that he gave her everything for nothing in return, and that she couldn't do anything without him, leaving her in a state of confusion and disorientation. Then he left her coldly, blaming her for his change and demanding she find a solution herself. Demos had a strange way of twisting facts and making Rowella look like the guilty one, but Rowella didn't doubt him for a moment. Instead, she blamed only herself. She would repeat to herself that he changed because of her and her shortcomings, and she feared he would be disappointed in her again if she failed in this investment, wondering how she would be able to live after that. Rowella didn't know then that the real reason the scammer Organ Siebert was able to deceive her was at the instigation of Demos himself. After the scam, Rowella was drowned in guilt, and in the midst of that, the maid Charlotte discovered the truth and began blackmailing her, threatening her to inform the Duke of everything if she didn't provide her with some pocket money, and that she would go to him immediately if Rowella refused her requests. The current Rowella watched Charlotte acting arrogantly, realizing she might be feeling delight at the thought of blackmailing her and getting a fortune as she always did. But she thought to herself that this blackmail wouldn't work on her anymore, because everything that controlled the original Rowella meant nothing to her now that she had possessed her body. The Demos that the original Rowella loved, she didn't care about, and the Duke she feared meant nothing to her, she who was abandoned by her parents in her previous life. For this reason, she realized she was the only one, with her knowledge of the original story, capable of saving Rowella from the shackles of the original plot. Suddenly, the system's voice rang in her head, so she decided that since she had become Rowella, she had to act, even if only to complete those ridiculous tasks. A new tutorial quest appeared before her, describing Charlotte as a wicked maid who exploits others' weaknesses and manipulates them. And the mission was: reform the wicked maid Charlotte. The reward for success was an increase in reputation, coins, and a special stat, with a timer of 120 hours. Although she considered it calculated, she saw the rewards were good. This was the first quest she actually liked, as she was already thinking about how to deal with Charlotte anyway. She remembered that Charlotte was blackmailing Rowella for money and valuables, so she thought that since she was the Villainess, she could be a bit harsh. She imagined screaming in Charlotte's face and threatening her with death, which would make the maid apologize in fear, seeing that this approach required a strong personality. But the system interrupted her with a new quest titled Proper and Kind Words, warning her that her reputation was low, and thus the system's sensitivity to profanity was high, so she was shocked that even those threats were considered profanity. The warning continued to appear, making her wonder angrily if this level of sensitivity was too low. She wondered in confusion if it was possible to hit her instead, but another message appeared immediately to declare that violence is bad, and asked her to try to resolve the matter amicably. She felt extremely angry at the repeated "violence is bad" message, and wondered how she was supposed to resolve the matter amicably. Her opponent treats her with disdain, and she is forbidden even from scaring her. So how could she reform her? She sighed and decided to stop being angry at the system window, summarizing her situation that she had to reform a wicked opponent, but in a way that didn't seem violent to anyone. And then, she decided she had no choice but to use that trait. In the original story, Charlotte yearned for the life of aristocrats and was obsessed with luxury goods, so the jewels she blackmailed Rowella for meant a lot to her, and she knew very well that Rowella, who fell into her grip, wouldn't be able to utter a word. This was exactly what the new Rowella decided to exploit. She devised a plan based on giving Charlotte some shiny accessories and acting submissively as if she were helpless, to satisfy the maid's longing for nobility and satisfy her sense of superiority. Thus, over time, Charlotte would forget her place and neglect her duties, leading to rumors spreading among the servants that she wasn't working. Eventually, the news would reach the Duke's ears, and then dealing with someone like Charlotte would be easy and the problem would end. But Rowella wondered about the extent of the system's allowance for such a plan. She first decided to test the system's precise standards, so she called Charlotte, who was surprised by her sudden invitation. Rowella began her plan with a subtle insult, telling Charlotte that her way of thinking was pure and she possessed beauty like Snow White. actually meaning her head was empty, which sparked Charlotte's confusion as she didn't understand her intent. Then the system's voice rang, and Rowella realized that speaking at this level of indirect insults fell within the permitted range. She smiled triumphantly, and while Charlotte was still wondering about the meaning of Snow White, she returned to ask about the pocket money mentioned earlier. Rowella opened a jewelry box, expressing her gratitude to Charlotte for keeping her secret all this time. Then she offered her to choose whatever she wanted from the box, even to take everything if she wanted, thinking to herself that this was the bait she would throw to Charlotte to make her follow her plan exactly. Charlotte was shocked and asked if she could really get everything she wanted, and Rowella answered in the affirmative, provided she kept the secret. Rowella asked her if the jewelry caught the eye, which increased the maid's excitement. After a brief hesitation, Charlotte couldn't restrain herself and accepted the offer, thanking her mistress. Charlotte hugged the box with overwhelming happiness, confirming she would definitely keep the secret. Rowella watched her thinking about her greed, then told her she was counting on her. Then she surprised her again by offering an additional ring. Rowella explained that this ring was expensive and popular among nobles these days, and she knew in her heart it was more expensive than everything in the jewelry box combined. This ring was the same one Rowella received from the high priest after being recognized as a saint, and its presence with Charlotte would be definitive proof that she blackmailed valuables from her. Happiness overwhelmed Charlotte, who expressed her great admiration for the ring, so Rowella encouraged her to wear it, thinking that the maid had no idea how dangerous this ring was, especially since she got it before coming to the palace. During that, Rowella noticed other maids in the hallway because it was cleaning time, so she realized the witnesses had been secured. She asked Charlotte to stop working and end her day, so the maid was surprised because she hadn't cleaned the room yet. Rowella convinced her it was better not to work lest she lose her jewelry, and that another maid could do it, so Charlotte was convinced. Charlotte left saying she was busy and that Rowella would handle cleaning her room herself. Rowella encouraged her to hurry and leave. The two other maids stood in a state of shock, wondering about what they had just seen. Rowella approached them and asked for their help in cleaning her room, explaining that Charlotte had gone home without doing her job. The two maids were surprised, but they immediately agreed to help their young mistress. Whispers began between them, as one noticed the room hadn't been cleaned at all, while the other whispered that Charlotte must have blackmailed the young lady again. So Rowella smiled a cunning smile, realizing the matter was easy. Since rumors about Charlotte's lack of sincerity were already widespread, Rowella was confident the news would spread quickly, and she felt she had achieved a good start. Now, she wondered with a triumphant smile, was it time to move to the next step? A few days later, two maids were seen whispering and exchanging talk about what they had recently heard and seen regarding the young lady. The two maids passed news about the chaos filling their mistress's room, concluding that her personal maid was no longer performing cleaning duties. And they also noticed that the lady's appearance in terms of her hair and clothes looked chaotic and neglected as well. The young lady seemed in a state of neglect, as if she were taking care of herself alone, which aroused the servants' pity, but they didn't dare to intervene or help her without receiving an explicit order from her first. In addition to that neglect, it was observed that the young lady had become spending most of her time isolated in the library, where she continues reading books listlessly and without any mentioned vitality. Those conversations passed the ears of the head butler while passing in the hallway, where servants interpreted her escape to books as an attempt to evade her heavy heart, making them believe the rumors spread about her were actually true. The maids were surprised when their whisper-filled conversation was interrupted by a sudden question about what they meant by those rumors. The questioner was the head butler, who appeared before them with a calm smile, sparking their terror and stuttering upon seeing him. The head butler justified his intervention by saying it was his duty to follow the young lady's affairs, then kindly asked them to inform him of the nature of those rumors they were talking about. At the same time, the young lady was sitting in the library as usual for the past days, while some servants watched her from afar, wondering if she really came just for reading, especially since the matter lasted for several days. The servants warned each other against talking loudly, fearing she might hear them, noting that she came today also alone without any of her usual guards or servants accompanying her. They expressed their deep regret for her condition, considering it unfortunate for someone in her position to fall under the control and manipulation of a bad maid, wondering sorrowfully what they could do to help her. Meanwhile, a slight and confident smile was drawn on the young lady's face, a sign of her satisfaction with the spread of those rumors among the servants exactly as she planned. Her primary goal from this play was for the news of her current miserable situation to spread in all corners of the palace, to a degree that ensures these news finally reach the Duke's ears himself. Her plan kept moving with steady steps for several consecutive days. As she regularly maintained her shabby appearance and her room that chaos fills to confirm her image as a persecuted victim. In contrast, her maid was drowned in the ecstasy of obtaining more jewelry and valuables she added to her spoils with joy and greed. With the continued spread of rumors in all parts of the Duke's palace and their scope gradually expanding, the plan proceeded smoothly without facing any mentioned obstacles. Since everyone was whispering those news secretly behind the greedy maid's back, she didn't realize what was going on around her and continued her behaviors with complete recklessness and without any concern. The young lady was certain that persisting in greed would inevitably lead to a fall, which was achieved when news spread of the Duke summoning her personal maid, prompting servants to ask each other to lower their voices to avoid revealing their matter. The young lady turned with quiet curiosity, trying to listen with focus to what the servants were circulating and understand the course of things. Her doubts were confirmed when she heard the maids talking about the head butler previously asking about those rumors, confirming to them that the news had finally reached the Duke. As soon as the news of the Duke summoning the maid just now reached the young lady's ears, she closed her book with features suggesting satisfaction and victory. Going back a few hours ago, the Duke was in his office seriously contemplating the strange news that began spreading recently in his palace. The Duke inquired from the head butler about the nature of that rumor, and the latter answered him respectfully that there are strong suspicions among the servants stating the young lady is subject to hidden blackmail by her personal maid. The Duke expressed his strong condemnation of the idea, wondering mockingly if it's reasonable for his daughter to subject to blackmail in complete silence, considering that this matter is hard to believe. The head butler noticed the Duke's reaction, refusing to believe the matter, which was completely expected for him. The head butler explained that he himself considered the matter nonsense at first, given his knowledge that the young lady is closer to the personality of one who threatens others, not the personality of one who is threatened. But he followed his talk, adding that there are other unusual developments, reminding the Duke of the reports he recently received about his daughter's repeated visits to the library, a behavior she hadn't been accustomed to before. The Duke downplayed the importance of this change in her behavior, assuming that this act is nothing but a desperate attempt from her to attract attention as she did in previous times. But the head butler denied this possibility, explaining that after monitoring for several days, it turned out the situation is different this time. Her excessive spending has declined and her interest in exaggerated adornment stopped, and she suddenly turned into a calm and well-behaved person, wondering about the lack of reports recently received about her cruel behavior. And this report pushed the Duke to think carefully that things indeed calmed down for a while, unlike the usual where daily reports about her transgressions were reaching them. The head butler added that at first he didn't believe those rumors either, but the many witnesses associated with them made it impossible to ignore them or consider them just empty chatter. He suggested to the Duke that it would be better to conduct a careful investigation into this matter to stand on its truth, while the Duke remained silent, listening with interest. The Duke sighed deeply, thinking about the matter, then nodded his head, agreeing to the head butler's suggestion, and he issued his strict orders to bring the personal maid involved in those rumors to his office immediately. Only moments passed until the maid, Charlotte, stood before the Duke, and signs of tension and confusion appeared on her as she asked him with a stuttering voice about the reason for his summoning her. Anxious questions were revolving in Charlotte's mind about the sudden reason for this summoning, especially since the Duke rarely asks to meet servants personally and directly like this. The Duke initiated her with the question to confirm her identity, then told her the purpose of her summoning, which is to verify the truth of the rumor that recently spread in the palace, making her wonder in confusion about what that rumor is. The Duke glared at her with a sharp and scary look and confronted her directly with the rumor claiming her blackmailing the young lady and exploiting her to seize her valuables. Charlotte flinched severely, and her eyes widened in shock and terror following her hearing those serious accusations directed at her. And she waved her hands in panic, denying her doing any act of this kind, and confirming that what is rumored is pure lies and slander. But the Duke wasn't easily convinced, and demanded her to provide any evidence proving her innocence and the truth of her claim. Charlotte stuttered and failed to answer, while she was cursing her luck and her secret and wondering in panic about the way the Duke was able to discover her matter. She excluded in her thinking that the young lady was the one who informed the Duke, because she is too cowardly to expose herself and admit causing troubles, remembering how she was pleading with her to keep her secret in exchange for giving her a precious necklace. The maid gnashed her teeth in resentment and concluded that someone else was the one who told on her, wondering anxiously if someone had seen her while taking the jewelry, and she decided in her heart to deny everything as a first step, betting that Rowella wouldn't want to expose her slips ever. Thus, she will help her in insisting on her innocence and denying those charges. And she considered it necessary to act with greater insolence and confidence in this situation, so she confirmed again that it's a false rumor, and boldly claimed that there is someone capable of proving her innocence. And she requested with all confidence summoning the young lady for testimony, confirming she will confirm her innocence. The head butler whispered in the Duke's ear, inquiring about the next step, and explaining that he had already sent someone to search the maid's room, and that the truth of her conviction or innocence will be clear soon anyway. And the Duke began talking to take his decision based on that, but he was interrupted by the door opening with force and momentum, for the young lady to appear storming the room suddenly. Rowella entered while panting and catching her breath with difficulty, and signs of despair and panic appear on her, announcing with a loud voice that she has something she wants to say as well. The Duke, the head butler, and Charlotte were surprised by this sudden entry, and the Duke uttered his daughter's name in surprise, while the maid felt shocked to see her at this moment. Rowella noticed the charged atmosphere in the room and smiled maliciously in her secret after realizing that Charlotte hadn't divulged the whole secret yet, and felt true comfort because the course of events is still in her favor. And Rowella wanted to seize the whole scene, so she threw herself on her knees dramatically on the floor and began apologizing to her father with a crying voice, claiming that everything that happened was her fault alone. The attendees were stunned by the force of her fall to a degree that they thought her knees had broken, while Charlotte stood in a state of complete amazement as she called her mistress in confusion from her strange behavior. Rowella was faking crying and collapsing, and thinking smartly that her prior admission of being subject to scam and blackmail will direct the situation in her favor entirely, for her father will never ignore his daughter being subject to such suffering. Then she asked him if the reason for his summoning Charlotte was that spreading rumor, and she continued her fabricated sobbing, confirming to her father the truth of all that reached his ears, and admitted her being subject to a major scam operation, and that Charlotte had exploited this situation as a means to blackmail her, which fell like a thunderbolt on the shocked maid's head. The Duke turned towards the maid with an angry and disapproving look of blackmail, to be confirmed to him that the rumors were true, while Rowella added that she failed to speak fearing, and that the maid continued seizing her valuables. Panic overwhelmed Charlotte, and she approached her mistress while pleading with her to clarify the matter, reminding her that she was the one who gave her those gifts voluntarily, and begged her to answer her and tell her father the truth to clear her. In the midst of this deteriorating situation, one of the knights entered, interrupting the talk, and informed the Duke that they had completed searching the maid's room as ordered, and that they had found something. And the knight opened a box full of shining jewels, and explained to the Duke that they found inside it possessions supposedly belonging to the young lady, and among them was the precious ring given to her by the high priest. Charlotte's eyes widened in terror and shock upon her hearing the mention of the high priest's ring, and she screamed disapprovingly and confirming she hadn't touched something like this ever in her life, and she doesn't realize the size of the trap that was skillfully closed around her. The maid was shocked, and sweat poured from her face while she glared at the precious ring, not believing what she sees. In that moment, the young lady exploited the situation to start her play, as she screamed with a loud voice, apologizing to her father, the Duke, which increased the confused maid's bewilderment behind her. And the lady continued her fabricated dramatic sobbing, pretending deep regret, and claiming she has failed completely in being a noble lady and a good saint, because instead of telling her father the truth and convincing the maid to admit her mistake, she allowed herself to submit to her blackmail. The Duke looked at her strictly and told her they will discuss her mistakes later, pointing with a sharp look that the priority now is to expel the rat that sneaked into the palace, meaning the greedy maid. In her secret, the lady bid farewell to her maid coldly, considering that getting rid of her was an unfortunate but inevitable step in order to complete her mission successfully. Immediately, two knights advanced and grabbed the maid with force to pull her outside by the Duke's order, while she was screaming in terror and pleading with them to give her a moment to explain her position. The maid continued her screams and pleas to the Duke, admitting her mistake and promised she will become a good person from now on, while the young lady remained kneeling on the floor watching the scene in silence. In the midst of that chaos, the lady hid a malicious smile behind her hands, pretending sadness, thinking that the maid must stop thinking about ways to stab people in their backs and start living a decent life, wishing their paths never cross again ever. With the massive doors closing after expelling the maid, the lady realized that that problem has finally been solved, and only facing her father remained before her now, who stood before her lofty, looking at her with serious and firm features waiting for an explanation for what happened. The lady immediately returned to the acting mode and began by admitting crying that she invested her money with the second son of Count Siebert, but the man scammed her and ran away with the money. The Duke was surprised by the name, pointing out that that man has already been struck off from his family records because of his bad behavior. The lady continued her crying, admitting her recklessness and haste, admitting she didn't discover the truth until it was too late, and added shyly that by the time she realized the matter, she had guaranteed an amount equivalent to her financial allocations for 3 months, which sparked the shock of the Duke and the head butler, as she was knowing in her secret that he must be stunned given that he warned her repeatedly against using the family name in guaranteeing huge amounts. The lady thought in her heart that from a technical point she is considered a victim in this story too, but since she is embodying now the Roella character of bad reputation, she has no other choice but to bear the consequences bravely. So she raised her head and offered a sincere and deep apology to her father, the Duke, who appeared somewhat surprised from her sincere tone. The Duke sighed, putting his hand on his forehead with fatigue, then asked her if she had paid the full amount guaranteed to the scammer. The lady noticed that his voice tone was calmer and softer than she expected in such a situation, so she answered him that she paid most of the amount by selling her luxury goods and jewelry, and only a little remained, for the Duke to nod understandingly. Then he surprised her by his offer to pay the remaining part for her himself, making her jump in her place from the severity of the shock. The Duke wondered about her exaggerated reaction and asked her if there was something wrong, so she rectified the matter quickly in her secret, confirming she is extremely grateful for his offer. But she never expected he would intervene to pay her debts with this speed and ease. The Duke warned her strictly against repeating this mistake, confirming what happened was enough, and as a cautionary punishment to be more careful in the future, he decided to suspend her financial allocations for only 3 months, making her wonder in amazement if the punishment was lighter than what was mentioned in the original novel. In the original story, Roella received a harsh scolding and was deprived of her allocations for 6 months, so she concluded that her early admission of guilt before being exposed might be the reason for lightening the punishment. Regardless of the reason for the Duke changing his mind, she smiled with satisfaction, considering that this development is not bad at all for her and for her plan's course, and she bowed with force until she almost hit her head on the floor, announcing her humble acceptance of his decision, which sparked drops of sweat on the head butler's face, who feared she might hurt herself from the force of the bow. The Duke was slightly surprised from her enthusiasm and told her she can leave if she understood the matter, so she answered him with obedience and vitality. Before she left, she stood and smiled kindly, pledging she will contemplate her actions from now on, and offered her sincere thanks to her father for standing by her side and fixing her repeated mistakes all the time. The Duke's features softened, and he called her by the paternity title for the first time, asking her to go for rest, so she thanked him again with gratitude and respect. After her departure, the Duke turned towards his head butler, Graham, wondering with a faint voice if he notices that the girl seems as if she has changed. Graham interrupted him with a warm smile, confirming he also sees she has already changed a little for the better. The Duke confirmed the head butler's observation, pointing out he has seen that change in his daughter too. The Duke cleared his throat, trying to hide his feelings. However, the head butler clearly noticed the features of pride and prestige that were drawn on his master's face. But the Duke soon warned himself against raising the ceiling of his expectations in vain, thinking about the possibility that his daughter is only pretending maturity to overcome this crisis, remembering the many disappointments that followed him whenever he hoped for her change. And memory returned him to her childhood, when she was his dear daughter and the apple of his eye, for whose upbringing he dedicated his heart to compensate for the absence of her late mother. And he remembered how a gap grew between them that made her seem far from him, until she grew up to become that arrogant girl she is now. For this reason, he had taken upon himself to be stricter with her, hoping for her return to the right path. Despite that, he wondered in himself if the length of time since seeing her tears is what made her occupy his thinking today more than usual. He also noticed how she looked much thinner than before, then grabbed his cane strongly as he repeated angrily the issue of her being subject to scam. And he issued a firm order to his head butler to issue a search warrant for that scammer, for the latter to inquire if he means the second son of Count Siebert. The Duke confirmed him angrily and hit the ground with his cane strongly, condemning how that young criminal dared to scam his daughter and the lady of the Brita family. And he ordered him to set a financial reward for capturing him as soon as possible, threatening to find him and punish him severely, in revenge for the family's honor. The head butler bowed with respect and a smile, confirming he will handle executing his orders immediately. Later that night, inside the young lady's room, the system window appeared to announce the success of the educational mission after the maid Charlotte admitted her mistake and pledged to live a good life, which made Rowella happy with the appearance of the reward window finally. Rowella contemplated the rewards, which included reputation points, coins, and special stats, considering them very good, then wondered if she could check her current reputation level. Immediately, a new window appeared before her, so she wondered at the speed of the system's response. But she was struck by confusion when she read that her reputation level reached 9 points, in addition to 6 other points. She remembered that her initial reputation was only 3 points, and by adding the 3 reward points, the total was supposed to become 6 points. And she sat thinking with extreme confusion about the source of the 3 additional points she got. It occurred to her mind the possibility that the Duke's positive reaction towards her had a connection to that increase, but she soon excluded this idea entirely, convincing herself that their relationship in the original story was extremely bad, and it's impossible for his heart to soften with just one apology. And she finally decided not to bother her mind with the matter, as long as the points are increasing. Then she tried to know how to use the special stats and coins she earned, but the system informed her that this function is not currently available. And she wondered with surprise if the reason for its unavailability is the low reputation level, concluding that everything in this system depends essentially on reputation. And she realized with enthusiasm that building a good reputation must be on top of her priorities, but she felt frustrated for her inability to do anything at the current time, describing the system as unhelpful. However, she thought about the conditions imposed by the system, like preventing insults and building good reputation, and she felt strange as if the system is constantly pushing her to be a person of high morals. And she wondered if this moral direction is linked to the final goal mentioned by the system previously. And she lay on her bed grumbling, announcing her inability to understand in light of the lack of information available to her. She finally decided to be patient and wait, confirming to herself that gathering information is the top priority, whether for the sake of completing missions or to ensure her survival in this world. And she yawned with sleepiness after the tension left her, deciding to take a measure of rest and sleep well after she completed her mission successfully. The next morning, her room door was knocked to wake up to the voices of 2 new maids, Mary and Jane, asking permission to enter to help her in preparing for the morning, so she allowed them to enter with a sleepy voice. As soon as the 2 maids entered, they were fixed in their place and screamed in terror and amazement, wondering if there was harm that befell the young lady. Rowella woke up to the screams of the 2 new maids and justified her tired appearance to them by saying she simply hadn't slept well the previous night. However, the 2 maids, Mary and Jane, expressed their concern, believing that what she went through because of the previous maid, Charlotte, was the cause of her exhaustion, and they promised to take good care of her from now on, so she could only thank them kindly. But the real reason behind her anxiety was not Charlotte, but the system window that appeared before her. She didn't know exactly when that window appeared, but she was certain it wasn't there before she went to sleep last night, and it carried a new hidden quest inviting her to collect donations and present them to the temple, with a promise to return 110% of the donation value in the form of coins. In addition to an increase in reputation upon reaching certain amounts, with the possibility of legally exchanging those coins for real money, and a warning against misusing the system, it seemed that the quest had already been accepted. The fact that the quest was already accepted aroused her confusion, and she wondered if she had unconsciously pressed the acceptance button while sleeping. Despite her confusion, she realized that the terms of the quest were very good, as she would not only recover the full donation amount, but also make a 10% profit, with the ability to convert the coins into real cash. Happiness overwhelmed her as she imagined the scene, describing it to herself as being like a safe, high-yield deposit account with 10% interest and no limits, and she admitted that if she were fully awake, she wouldn't have hesitated for a moment to accept this tempting offer. But she soon collided with reality, wondering in confusion about the source of the funds she would donate, especially since her financial allocations had been suspended for 3 months. Even though there was no specific deadline for the quest, she realized this also meant it could end suddenly at any moment, so it was better to accomplish it as quickly as possible. The matter wasn't just about money, but the real key lay in the speed of raising her reputation to reach the ending story and claim the hidden quest rewards. And only then, as she thought while smiling joyfully, would she finally be able to start her glorious life that she had always dreamed of as a completely unemployed person. Her dreams were interrupted by the maid's voice telling her of the arrival of a guest, so she wondered about his identity. After a moment of thought, she decided it was better to check the matter herself, as the guest might have a connection to the original Rowella, and ordered him to be let in. A woman with red hair and a luxurious red dress entered and addressed Rowella directly, expressing in seemingly kind words her regret for her deteriorating health. But she sarcastically hinted that these minor ailments of hers would have been nothing if she possessed greater holy power. Rowella immediately realized she was her cousin, Helena. That was undoubtedly Helena Duder, Rowella's relative and rival who appeared briefly in the original story, who possessed blood-colored eyes and hair, and an arrogant attitude that contradicted her soft words. The reason for the bitter rivalry between them was that Helena had constantly sought to stir up conflicts with Rowella in order to win the favor of her uncle, the Duke of Brita. Helena's tricks consisted of skillfully provoking Rowella, as she would pretend to fall and claim that Rowella pushed her. She would start crying and playing the victim's role, asking in a broken voice how much Rowella hated her, while Rowella would scream, trying to defend herself and deny the charge. The servants would whisper that she always despised Helena, and that not a day could pass without a scene. The matter always ended with the Duke's intervention, ordering Rowella to end the commotion and apologize immediately. Rowella would comply with the order while Helena hid a cunning smile of victory. Thus, thanks to these methods, Helena always succeeded in making Rowella look like the aggressor, while the original Rowella, who wasn't as cunning as her cousin, fell into the trap of her provocations and always bore the consequences without even realizing the real reason behind her targeting. For this reason, the original Rowella could only loathe her more, even though Helena herself had no good reason for her bullying, except for her desire to look good in front of the Duke, which she confirmed when she bragged about the new dress her uncle bought for her, describing him as a kind man. Then she directed her provocation to Rowella, wondering if her uncle was equally kind to her. Fully aware that Rowella's relationship with her father was strained, her clear goal was to spark her jealousy and emphasize that she had lost his favor to the point that she no longer even got new dresses. But the current Rowella looked at the whole situation with disdain, considering Helena's actions extremely childish. She decided it was better not to give a child like her the reaction she craved, so she answered her calmly that she wasn't sure about that. And maybe the reason was that their relationship as a family doesn't require him to exert conscious effort or perform a difficult act every time. This calm response confused Helena, so she initiated a defensive question about whether Rowella was hinting that the Duke's kindness to her was just an act, which Rowella calmly denied. Then Rowella continued her talk, explaining that her father enjoys a generous nature, and he most likely pays his niece a lot of attention, even if not to the same extent he grants his daughter. And these words had the impact of a shock on Helena, whose face turned red as she listened in amazement. Helena gripped her fan tightly as she wondered in confusion about the source of this sudden confidence Rowella was speaking with, as she knew in her heart that the Duke sent only money, and that she was the one who bought the dress herself. Helena continued trying to convince herself that if her uncle didn't adore her, he wouldn't have sent the money in the first place, while Rowella had asked her maid to prepare tea. Helena continued her internal monologue, assuring herself that her uncle cherishes her just like his daughter, and perhaps even more than Rowella herself. But Rowella interrupted her thoughts calmly and asked her to leave her room because she would like to enjoy drinking tea, which struck Helena with surprise. Rowella confirmed her request with a calm smile, repeating that she wants to get some rest in her home and her own private room, and for this, she asks her to leave. Helena exploded in anger at this unexpected situation, as she was used to Rowella losing her temper at the slightest provocation, so she wondered about the cause of this strange calmness she possessed today. Then an idea flashed in her mind, and a cunning smile appeared on her face as she remembered that there was a simple way to shatter Rowella's artificial calmness, which was by mentioning the name Demos Killian. Helena changed her style immediately and claimed she came today to check on Rowella, then told her there were rumors spreading about her everywhere. She explained that the Duke had issued a search warrant for Siebert's second son, and she heard that the reason was Rowella being subjected to a scam operation at his hands, which aroused Rowella's apparent surprise. So Helena laughed in her secret, enjoying her reaction. Although Rowella wondered to herself if her father had actually gone that far, Helena considered that a sign of her plan's success. She thought Rowella might have believed for a moment that her relationship with the Duke had improved, but this news proves he is still on Helena's side, and she prepared to drop her next bomb. Helena revealed that the young Duke Demos Killian, whom Rowella was relentlessly chasing, had already learned everything about this incident. She was eagerly waiting to see the disappointment on the face of Rowella, who indeed seemed surprised. But Rowella maintained her calmness and sipped from the tea, saying she understood the matter, then wondered coldly about the relationship of Demos knowing about the matter with her. Helena was completely surprised by this response and felt confused and disoriented as she wondered about the cause of Rowella's calmness, as she expected her to plead with her at this moment. Rowella put down the teacup and decided to clarify to Helena that she was wrong in her understanding of things. She explained to her logically that the reason that pushed her father to issue a search warrant was a clear announcement that scammers should not dare to underestimate their family, and that this was his way of protecting her. Then she wondered with a confident smile whether she should consider Helena's spreading of such rumors as an insult directed at the Duke's house itself. Helena was shocked and mocked the idea, considering it impossible, as everyone in the Empire knows that Rowella's relationship with the Duke is strained, and that the idea of him warning others to protect her is pure illusion. But despite her internal denial, doubt began to creep into her heart, and she wondered if Rowella's words might actually be true. Doubt soon turned into real fear, as she realized that if she were right, it might mean that she is the one who will lose her favor with the Duke. Helena tried to back down with a nervous laugh, claiming she was just worried about her, and that she came to tell her about the matter first out of care. Rowella went along with her with a kind smile and praised Helena's kind heart and intelligence. But as soon as Helena turned to leave, Rowella approached her and whispered, warning her that she at least wouldn't be foolish enough to chatter in another place as she was just doing. Helena stuttered as she confirmed she wouldn't do that, of course, and promised she would maintain her silence. Rowella smiled with satisfaction and told her she could leave now. Helena left boiling with anger, wondering how she ended up in this situation and how Rowella managed to maintain her calmness until the end. Helena gnashed her teeth as she realized that ultimately she was the only one who was manipulated, and wondered how that girl dared to do that to her. Helena was thinking spitefully about how to return the insult she was subjected to, and meanwhile her maid interrupted her thoughts to tell her of a message's arrival. Helena wondered about what the message was, and the maid confirmed to her it was the one she was waiting for. So signs of shock and surprise appeared on Helena. She snatched the message from the maid's hand eagerly, and after she saw its content, a cunning smile was drawn on her face as she realized that her opportunity had come. She saw in this message her opportunity for revenge, vowing to Rowella that she would see how long this artificial calmness she possessed today would last. Meanwhile, Rowella was sitting at the dining table with her father, the Duke, in a strange atmosphere, as he had suddenly summoned her to have a meal with him, which hadn't happened for a long time. A feeling of strangeness and discomfort took over her, and the general atmosphere seemed tense and embarrassing to a degree that she felt she might suffer from indigestion. It increased her confusion that they used to eat food separately throughout the past period, so she wondered anxiously whether he had invited her to scold her about something. It occurred to her mind that the reason might be Helena, so she imagined she might have hurried to complain to the Duke after their last confrontation, and remembered how she spoke with confidence about her father's intention to protect her. She admitted in her secret that she acted impulsively at that moment, and that she had never confirmed the Duke's true intentions. However, her father didn't utter a single word since the beginning of the meal, making her wonder if he had really invited her to eat food with him only. She decided not to stay in a state of anticipation, and that she should test his mood first. So she drew a business smile on her face and thanked him for her invitation, expressing her happiness to have a meal together after a long time. The Duke asked her if she was indeed happy, and she confirmed that with enthusiasm, adding that the food's taste today is especially delicious. The Duke smiled with relief, thinking to himself that his head butler, Graham, was right when he suggested arranging this meal. A few hours ago in the Duke's office, he had asked about the source of the commotion outside. The head butler told him that Lady Helena Duder had come to visit the young lady. The Duke thought about Helena's insistence on approaching his daughter, even though Rowella never allows her to do so. Then Graham moved to talk about the search warrant the Duke issued against the fugitive organ and pointed out that it sparked a lot of controversy. He explained that most people believe the warrant was not for the public interest, but was a step to protect the young lady. He added that the rumor had even reached the ears of the young Duke Killian, and that he had publicly expressed his disappointment towards the young lady. The Duke exploded in anger, wondering mockingly about Killian's identity to dare feel disappointment. But the head butler reminded him that he himself often expresses his disappointment too. The Duke justified his position that he is her father, and this gives him the right to do so. The Duke sighed as he assumed that Rowella, who is still obsessed with Duke Killian, must have caused a huge commotion again upon hearing this rumor. Graham surprised him by denying that, confirming she did nothing this time. Quoting her two new personal maids, he explained that she didn't show any interest in the rumor. On the contrary, she expressed her regret for the foolishness of those who spread gossip behind the Duke's back. The Duke was shocked, wondering if Rowella had really said that, as she didn't settle for refraining from causing trouble, but understood his intentions perfectly and went as far as criticizing the foolish nobles. The Duke remembered how his daughter seemed to act with uncharacteristic thought since the last incident, and how she thanked him for fixing her mistakes, so he wondered if she had really decided to change. Graham suggested that the young lady might have started to gain confidence in the Duke, especially after he personally intervened to solve her problem this time, and that through this confidence and reliance on him, her view of those around her might have started to expand. The Duke was deeply moved by the idea that his child had decided to trust him and rely on him. He tried to hide his feelings, describing her as naughty, who is moved by a simple matter. but expressed his concern that she might open her heart to others too quickly. The head butler admitted that the young lady's heart must be heavy with troubles, so he suggested to the Duke that he share dinner with her that night to understand her feelings better. The Duke was surprised by the suggestion, pointing out that years had passed since the last time they ate food together, which was confirmed by Graham, considering it the main reason behind his suggestion. He explained that even if the young lady had opened her heart, it might still be difficult for her to initiate approaching him first, so he must extend his hand to her. He added that talking with her would enable him to deepen their relationship and understand her feelings, in addition to confirming whether she has really changed, considering it hitting two birds with one stone. The Duke was convinced by his head butler's point of view and saw that the matter is logical, so he issued his order to summon Rowella for dinner that night. Back at the dinner table, the Duke was thinking that his daughter in the past would have left her seat angrily and wondered if she had really opened her heart to him, while Rowella was thinking that this situation is like a business dinner with her boss and that she must maintain his good mood. She continued her talk, expressing her happiness for this moment, explaining that she always wanted to spend time with him, but she avoided that, thinking he hates seeing her, so she felt overwhelming happiness when he initiated talking with her first. The Duke was deeply moved by her words, and suddenly the atmosphere changed, making Rowella wonder anxiously if she had said something wrong. The Duke was muttering in shock that all he did harshly was for her, and that she wanted to be with him but couldn't approach because of him, which made Rowella notice that he started muttering with a serious face. Rowella realized that the situation was going in the wrong direction and decided to turn the talk's helm to something that might improve her reputation, so she asked her father if he knows how to offer donations to the temple. She explained that she would like to donate as a way to atone for her misguided past, but embarrassingly, she doesn't exactly know how the process goes. The Duke was surprised and asked her if she was serious in her desire to donate, even though her financial allocations will be cut for a period. So she answered that the valuables she owns are from the remnants of the sins she committed in the past, so she wants to get rid of them quickly. Her answer sparked the admiration of the servants, who were whispering that the young lady has really changed. So Rowella replied to them that repentance must push one to go this far. But she thought in her secret that all this was actually for the sake of completing the mission, and that the good result remains a good result in the end. The Duke smiled and told her that regarding donations, it would be better to ask the new theology teacher, who will arrive within a few days. Rowella was shocked upon hearing of the existence of a new teacher and realized that this is the place where the original Rowella's past sins would appear. Usually, nobles received their lessons from teachers sent from the temple or from ordinary priests. But thanks to her privilege as a saint, Rowella was receiving individual special theology lessons from high-ranking priests. Despite this exceptional treatment, the original Rowella was replacing her teachers casually without a second thought, treating them as tools that can be discarded. She would expel them for trivial reasons, such as she doesn't like their faces, or that their voices are annoying, or that the lesson is boring. Her actions were so heinous that the number of high-ranking priests who left crying must fill a whole truck. Thus, after her previous responsible priest escaped from her tyranny not long ago, a new teacher was appointed for her again, making her think in despair that at this rate she will end up meeting every high-ranking priest in existence. The Duke interrupted her thoughts, warning her, and asked her if she knows what this teacher's number is without having to say it, so she answered immediately with yes. She reassured him that that wouldn't happen again, and promised that she would attend her lessons diligently from now on. Rowella thought to herself that she couldn't allow her reputation that was about to rise to collapse because of something like this, and that this is a perfect opportunity to leave a good impression not only on the Duke, but on the temple as well. In the Great Temple, one of the priests was asking another priest named Victor where he was going, explaining that it wasn't the direction of the prayer hall. Victor replied that he would start going to the Duke of Brida's palace from today, and thus he wouldn't be able to attend the prayer service. So the other priest realized that he had been appointed as a theology teacher for the saint, and it seemed as if a new victim had appeared. Victor wondered about the reaction, so his colleague asked him if he didn't know anything about the saint. So he began reciting to him how she is always late for class, and wears bright dresses and jewelry in serious theology lessons, and never opens her books. Instead, she complains about the priests' faces or their voices, which are matters that have nothing to do with the lesson. And he wondered about the number of innocent priests who already fell victim to her, expressing his disbelief that someone like her could be the saint. So Victor wondered calmly if this was true. His colleague reassured him that it probably wouldn't take a long time, as the longest period anyone had endured so far was only 1 week, and asked him to consider the matter suffering for a few days, then return. The priest wished good luck to his colleague Victor Hyperion, who was walking away. Victor thought that hearing stories about a saint who doesn't act like a saint at all had aroused his curiosity to know what kind of person Saint Rowella is. Meanwhile, Rowella arrived at the lessons place early, realizing that just arriving on time wouldn't be enough to show her change, given that the original Rowella was always late. She knew that the temple must be full of complaints about her previous bad behavior, and that any clash with it at the current time would put her in an embarrassing position. Fortunately for her, a new theology teacher arrived just in time, and she saw in that an opportunity to show them that the rogue Saint Rowella has finally changed and opened a new page, so she sat pretending to read with a calm smile, although she didn't know anything about the book's content. Over time, she felt bored and wondered about the cause of the slow passage of time, as there were still 2 hours before the lesson started, and she suggested that the teacher hadn't arrived yet. But she convinced herself that she had no other choice to prove her change. So she decided to exploit the time in thinking about the donation mission that appeared in the system window. She had to donate to the temple to complete the mission, and to do that, she needed money. Even if she sold all her jewelry, the money would run out quickly, especially since she had already given some of it to Charlotte. She wondered if there was another way to collect a large sum of money safely and legally, but nothing occurred to her mind as she confirmed the absence of a lottery in this world and wished if her gold coins could multiply on their own. While she was drowned in her thoughts, a coin slipped from her hand and fell into the nearby water fountain, so she screamed in panic over her lost money. She felt despair for a moment, as she was already suffering from financial hardship, but she soon reassured herself that it at least fell into a fountain and not into a sewer. Here, an idea flashed in her mind. It was a wishing fountain, and she wondered how she hadn't thought of that before. She decided to establish a fountain of her own. Just because wishing fountains exist in modern tourist sites doesn't mean there can't be one here. She saw that the matter is not just about money, but even people who cannot usually come to the temple can pray at the fountain, and small donations like coins will be enough. Lowering the financial burden will make donations accessible to all segments of society, and if people's prayers and coins accumulate, the total amount will eventually become large. The saint, in the end, is just a messenger for people's prayers, and building a fountain in the name of the saint and delivering donations to the temple seemed to her the perfect solution. She set her first goal, which is building the fountain, and looked forward eagerly to her lottery fountain. She thought that the fountain's cost could be covered by selling jewelry, and what really matters is where to place it and how to spread the news about it. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, so she realized the teacher had arrived. The teacher was the priest, Victor, who was surprised by her arrival first, then expressed his pleasure to meet her, and introduced himself as he would be the new theology teacher for her starting from today. He told her that his name is Victor Hyperion, so Rowella froze in her place in shock. He was the messenger from the original story, a man possessing immense divine power, cold logic, and a heart that embraces people with warmth, which earned him the support of both the Empire and the Temple. And when the true saint appears later, he becomes an active supporter for her, and reveals that Rowella is a fake saint. He played a crucial role in the story, which means he might be a dangerous opponent for her. Rowella didn't believe he appears here in this way. In the original story, he appeared as a messenger indeed, which made her relax her caution. Rowella noticed that Priest Victor's features were non-hostile, and the idea occurred to her that based on his current behavior, he doesn't seem to harbor hatred for her from the start, wondering to herself if this class was the reason that later led to the original Rowella's clash with him. And Victor initiated asking her if there was something wrong after he noticed her astonished looks. Rowella decided in her heart to take caution, convinced that there is no need to provoke someone who might become an enemy for her in the future, so she drew a calm laugh and answered him simply that there is nothing that calls for concern. She continued her talk with a bright smile, expressing her looking forward to his guidance as a student who lacks experience, while she was reminding herself of the necessity of focusing on her basic goal, which is portraying the role of the perfect student who acts in the best possible way on that day. She was determined to leave a positive and excellent impression on the new teacher, who settled for looking at her in silence and a look carrying some surprise from her polite style. Victor thought that the girl doesn't seem harsh or fierce as rumors promote her, so he decided to monitor her behavior for a longer period before issuing any judgment, and exchanged a light smile with her, saying he looks forward in turn to learning from her as well. Before they proceeded with formal lessons, Victor asked her if she was aware of the Empire's founding background, so she answered him while sitting politely that she knows the story in general, summarizing it in the appearance of a god to save the world when it drowned in chaos. Victor noticed the superficiality of her answer, so he commented with something of frustration that she indeed only knows the shells, making Rowella feel some embarrassment, justifying that to herself as the original novel didn't deepen into these details more than that. Victor rectified the situation with a light clearing of the throat, suggesting that he provide a brief explanation since it's the first day of lessons. The teacher began reciting the story, explaining that in the beginning of creating the world and the appearance of humans, there was a delicate balance between the forces of good and evil. But this balance didn't last, as the evil god Ahutib intervened in the human world at some stage, which led to the tyranny of the force of evil quickly. And as soon as the balance was disturbed, chaos swept the entire world. In light of this imbalance, the malicious forces exploited the opportunity to spread disorder, which sowed doubt and lack of trust among people, for mutual killing operations to start, and the world to turn into what resembles a living hell. In the midst of this overwhelming chaos, their goddess Lucera descended to Earth aiming to save humanity from its inevitable destruction. Lucera took pity on humans and offered them a helping hand, and she sealed Ahutib's body, soul, light, and darkness, and distributed them to the 4 directions of the empire: north, south, east, and west. In the end, Lucera sealed herself side by side with Ahutib's heart, offering thus a great sacrifice so the world could enjoy peace. Rowella interrupted the explanation by raising her hand asking permission to pose a question, so the teacher allowed her that immediately. Rowella inquired with interest about the heart's fate, pointing out that he mentioned dividing the body, soul, light, and darkness on the 4 directions, wondering about the place where the heart was specifically sealed. Victor was surprised by her question and stopped for a moment in amazement, before he averted his face, claiming that there is nothing unusual in her question. The teacher explained that the heart's precise location remains unknown, as Lucera hid it to prevent it falling into the hands of those who might misuse it, despite the existence of assumptions that it's hidden in some place inside the capital. Rowella concluded that the reason behind that is the capital being the empire's center, which Victor confirmed, so she thought in her heart that that capital's center is the royal palace. And she contemplated in her secret the fact that most members of the royal family possess abilities far exceeding normal humans' abilities, wondering if that has any connection to the evil god's heart. And she recalled her information that those abilities are known as blessings, and that the royal family, thanks to them, plays the role of the guardian for the empire. Rowella muttered faint words about those blessed guardians, recalling how the crown prince Hildian in the original story was possessing power exceeding any other person. The crown prince, Hildian Kairos, was born with the strongest blessing since the first emperor's era, to a degree that his participation was enough to end wars that lasted for years in a few days, and he embodied the true model of the emperor who loves his empire, making everyone trust without doubt that he will become a great emperor and lead the country towards glory. Despite that, Rowella realized that no one can predict the future, as just as she didn't expect her end in her previous life, that powerful prince wasn't able to predict his tragic fate either, and she wondered sorrowfully whether he was really destined to meet his end under the weight of a deadly curse. In another scene, Hildian appeared disguised in a cloak accompanied by his men, confirming their arrival at their intended destination. The next day, while Rowella was boarding her carriage, her maid noticed the good mood her mistress seems to be in. Rowella smiled brightly, confirming she is in an excellent moral state because she finally managed to find a solution to the problem that distressed her for a long time. And she returned with her memory to her dialogue with teacher Victor when she offered him her idea represented in building a wishing fountain in the capital square. Victor was surprised by her sudden talk, shifting from the desire to donate to building a fountain, so she explained to him with enthusiasm that people will be able to throw coins in it and wish wishes, where 1 coin represents happiness and 2 represent luck, while 3 coins guarantee the wish's fulfillment. Rowella explained to Victor, who was astonished by her idea, that this method will allow even those whose circumstances prevent them from visiting the temple to donate, while they wish a wish with happiness, with the emphasis that the coins will be used as donations. She followed with a confident smile, suggesting using the temple's name to establish that fountain in the capital's square. She added with enthusiasm that every coin that accumulates in the fountain will be donated to the temple entirely, thinking in her secret that by leaving authority and management to the temple, she will exempt herself from any troubles, and considered herself a genius for inventing this plan. She felt satisfaction when she noticed Victor's positive acceptance of her idea, making her confident that the high priest will agree to it as soon as he hears it. Indeed, as soon as the lesson ended and Victor returned to the temple, the high priest firmly insisted on Victor the necessity of moving forward in executing the fountain project immediately. Meanwhile, Rowella was walking with a relaxed smile, thinking that one of her problems has been solved, and only one matter remained before her. This matter was selling her jewelry to provide the cost of building the fountain, so she headed disguised in a cloak to one of the jewelry stores, where the shop owner with the mustache welcomed her, wondering if she was looking for certain stones. Rowella brought out a small bundle and told him she didn't come to buy but to sell some gemstones. The merchant looked at her with condescension, thinking to himself with annoyance about the identity of this girl he hadn't seen before, considering her a waste of his time. Despite that, he agreed to take a look, convincing himself that her jewelry wouldn't be valuable given her appearance, and decided to evaluate it quickly to dismiss her. But as soon as he opened the bundle, his eyes widened in shock and amazement before a gemstone possessing flawless purity. Wondering at seeing stones of this high quality he hadn't seen the like of for a long time, the merchant wondered in himself in amazement about the way a girl like her got this precious jewelry. His shock increased when Rowella informed him calmly that she owns more of these stones, making him jump from his place, not believing. A greedy smile was drawn on the merchant's face, realizing that this visit was not a waste of time, but that this customer represents a precious catch that cannot be let go. He approached her eagerly, wondering if she intended to sell everything at once, which aroused Rowella's surprise and wariness from his sudden enthusiasm, so she asked him if there was a problem with the jewelry. The merchant rectified the situation, justifying his enthusiasm that his small store doesn't possess the financial capacity to handle this massive amount of precious jewelry at once. He offered her instead to guide her to a major jeweler who offers excellent prices, making Rowella hesitate to go to another place. But the merchant reassured her that the place is not far, and that it's located directly behind his shop's back door. Rowella was thinking that she promised her maid, Jane, to return quickly and didn't plan to stop in another place, but she saw that it's better to finish selling the jewelry quickly as long as she already came out. She agreed to his offer based on his confirmation that the distance is short, so the merchant asked her to follow him to guide her to the intended store. The merchant smiled with suspicious cunning as he asked her to leave the matter to him. He led her through dark back alleys, making Rowella realize that the atmosphere is strange and suspicious, and doubt began to haunt her about whether she had followed the wrong person. The merchant stopped in one of the rooms and asked her to wait for moments until his boss arrives. So Rowella wondered in confusion and concern about his intent with the word boss. Suddenly, the creak of a door opening was heard, and the sound of footsteps approaching, and a man's voice wondering about the customer who came to sell jewelry, making Rowella jump in panic. A strong-bodied man carrying scars appeared before her, and smiled at her, welcoming and confirming she came to the right place, then introduced himself as Sharon, the leader of the Bastion area, promising her to get a good price. Rowella was struck upon her hearing Sharon's name and remembered immediately that Bastion is the dangerous and secret lower area in the capital. She recalled what she knows about this place full of dangerous weapons, unknown plants, and jewelry that is hard to distinguish between real and fake. She realized she is standing now in an area where law is completely absent and all kinds of illegal trade flow in it. And the actual ruler of this underworld and the controller of all its secrets was none other than this man standing before her, Sharon. Rowella remembered from the original story's events that Sharon is a very dangerous man who doesn't hesitate to seize his customers' lives without mercy as soon as his mood sours. So she turned with anger towards the merchant with the mustache, cursing him in her secret for his claim that his store is reliable. In contrast, the merchant glared at her with a malicious smile, so Rowella realized with horror that he lured her into this trap intending to strip her of all her precious jewelry she was carrying. Sharon asked Rowella to show him the jewelry first, making her retreat a little while, feeling tension and suspicion from his request. Rowella cursed the situation in her secret and tightened her grip on her cloak, thinking that her top priority now is getting out of this room in peace without raising their suspicions about her intention to escape. To justify her retreat, she claimed that that jewelry has great emotional value for her, and that it's wrong to get rid of it this quickly. Then she apologized, retreating towards the door on the pretext that she will think about the matter a little and return later. But before she could withdraw, a sharp knife was suddenly brandished near her neck, and Sharon told her coldly that he will handle settling the matter on her behalf if she needed to think, which struck her with shock and panic. Sharon directed his knife's blade towards her directly with a malicious smile, and ordered her with a decisive tone to hand him everything in her possession of jewelry immediately. Rowella wondered in terror what he thinks himself doing, protesting that he cannot expect her to hand him her possessions and leave as if nothing happened. But Sharon mocked her, pointing out that her face features confirm she won't give up the jewelry easily, leaving him only one choice. Sharon waved his knife, threatening her with killing to seize the jewelry by force, so Rowella screamed in panic while trying to dodge the blow. She closed her eyes tightly, surrendering to her fate, while thinking sorrowfully that her dreams of wealth had evaporated and she would meet her end in this dark place. But in the decisive moment, an unknown person suddenly intervened, and countered Sharon's attack with force, directing him a blow that knocked him back and made him moan in pain. Sharon exploded in anger and gnashed his teeth while asking the attacker sharply about his identity, wondering if he was the girl's partner. Rowella opened her eyes in amazement to comprehend what happened, while the mysterious man explained that he is not her partner, but he simply couldn't stand idly by while seeing a weapon pulled in a woman's face. Rowella contemplated her savior's back, who was wearing a dark cloak, and wondered in confusion if he had come specifically to help her. And she thought logically that any person wandering in a dangerous place like this cannot be an ordinary person. And suspicions haunted her about whether he was a character from the original novel her memory didn't help her in recognizing. The man turned a little and ordered Sharon to surrender quietly. And then Rowella was able to see his features with his red eyes and distinctive sword, so she wondered in shock about his true identity. Soon Sharon and the deceitful merchant were tied up, and Sharon began cursing and launching threats, vowing to her savior that he won't get away with his act, and wondering if he thinks he will be safe after attacking Bastion's leader. The mysterious man didn't care for his threats, but pulled his sword a little coldly and challenged him to execute his threat if he really possesses the ability to do that. Rowella watched the scene, admitting in her heart she survived an inevitable death thanks to this stranger. But she remembered also that getting involved with strangers without a reason only brings troubles. So she decided to exploit this chaos to withdraw quietly, thinking she would thank him if they were destined to meet again. And while she was sneaking away, the system window appeared directly before her face, making her stop and flinch from the surprise. The window announced the success of a hidden quest, explaining that she met the male lead, Hildian, and offered her receiving a holy relic as a reward, while the glowing stone was floating before her. Rowella was struck by this information and realized finally that the man who saved her was none other than Hildian, the original story's main hero. Panic seized her, and she rejected the idea entirely while waving her hands trying to push away the window, convinced that getting involved with the story's hero will bring her countless problems, and wondered about the reason for his presence here from the start, confirming to herself that she doesn't need a holy relic or any great thing, for all she wanted was selling jewelry and returning in peace. But she stopped for a moment when a sudden idea hit her about the timing of his appearance, and wondered if the male lead's appearance at this particular time and the system's presentation of this reward carries a certain significance. She looked towards Hildian and his tied-up opponents, assuming that all these events might be linked in some way, and that maybe this gift has major importance in the future. Despite her confusion and ignorance of what the days hide, she decided in the end to accept the reward and complete the mission first. The system confirmed receiving the reward successfully, and in the meantime, Hildian turned to look at her from the corner of his eye. After their exit from that dark place, Rowella thanked with a wide smile for his saving her, expressing her relief for her survival after she was lured to that small shop and subjected to intimidation. Hildian noticed the extent of the panic that seized her, and offered her kindly to accompany her until she reaches her home safely, which surprised her greatly. Rowella laughed with tension and rejected his offer politely, justifying that in her secret that she didn't even succeed in selling her jewelry, and that staying with the story's hero might subject her to variables and problems she is in no need of, so she preferred hurrying to return alone, renewing her thanks to him. Hildian respected her desire and wished her a safe return, and as they were parting, Rowella noticed the presence of strange black dust falling from his shoulder, so she wondered in confusion whether it was just dust that stuck to him during their exit from that place. Rowella caught Hildian's attention to the presence of some dust on his left shoulder, suggesting removing it, but he looked at his shoulder in confusion and denied the existence of anything there. Rowella wondered at his lack of seeing the dust, although it was perfectly clear before her eyes, so she extended her hand towards him and offered to brush it off him herself. As soon as she wiped with her hand on his shoulder, she felt a strange texture crumbling under her fingers instead of flying away like normal dust. And that coincided with a sudden notifications ring. A system window appeared before her announcing the completion of removing the bug and the mission's success, promising her the automatic acquisition of a new skill called Eyes That See Bugs, which struck her with extreme shock. Rowella realized that what she removed just now was not dust, but a bug, and she began rubbing her arm with discomfort while thinking that the succession of system windows and bugs' appearance makes this world seem as if it's a strange game. Suddenly, notifications followed in an annoying way, and multiple windows appeared before her carrying additional explanations, which sparked her resentment and pushed her to wonder about the cause of the system's lack of summarizing this information, grumbling that the time is unsuitable for reading, while Hildian tried to talk to her. Rowella lost her temper entirely from the many windows and screamed, demanding the system to disappear. But because of activating the profanity filter, the words came out of her mouth in the form of unintended flirtation as she shouted, describing him as cute. Hildian was completely surprised by this sudden shouting and asked her with confusion whether she was directing this talk to him. Rowella was seized by panic and alarm while cursing in her secret the profanity filter that dropped her into this embarrassing situation, thinking about the catastrophe that befell her and how he will understand her words in a completely wrong way. She tried to rectify the situation with stuttering, claiming she was wrong in expression because of extreme exhaustion, and when Hildian offered her again to accompany her, she rejected strongly and moved away quickly, feeling embarrassed, confirming she will return alone. Rowella set off running at her maximum speed, escaping from the situation, leaving Hildian standing in his place looking after her in amazement, and he had asked her to wait in vain. In the meantime, a man appeared behind him, putting his hand on his chin, thinking about the word she called Hildian by, and smiled lightly, considering that one lives to see and hear truly amazing things. He turned to him smiling while expressing his amazement from this situation he hadn't witnessed the like of throughout 8 years he spent in His Highness's service. Hildian addressed the man by the name Heston, who apologized in turn for surprising him, confirming he didn't imagine at all finding that girl in this place. Heston wondered in confusion about the reason that pushes the saint to come to this suspicious area, disguised and hiding her true identity. Hildian raised a possibility that she might have come based on a divine revelation, especially as she took the holy relic secretly earlier, which sparked Heston's shock, who wondered about this matter's truth, pointing out that this explains the cause of his inability to find the holy relic despite his continuous search, then asked the Crown Prince anxiously whether it's right to allow her to leave like this, and reminded him that His Highness is in the direst need of that holy relic at the current time, making Hildian silent, drowned in his thoughts. Memory returned Hildian back when an unknown curse began to spread in his body about 3 months ago, accompanied by a painful headache and extreme exhaustion that deprived him of sleep. When he searched for this curse's origin, he discovered the horrific truth that it's linked to the evil god Ahutib, which formed an extremely serious crisis. In the Kairos Empire, which is known for being a holy empire for its deep faith in gods, the Crown Prince's infection with an evil god's curse is a real disaster. It was possible for this curse to form a major stigma that pushes people to question his eligibility for taking the throne and stir nobles' whispers and objections. Therefore, he decided to hide the curse's matter from everyone except Heston, and dedicated his time to the secret search for a way to get rid of it. His journey, full of risks to this area, was stemming from his belief that the holy relic might possess the power necessary to lift that curse from him. Despite that, Hildian explained to his subordinate that since the relic has now become in the saint's possession, he has no justification to recover it from her, and he is forced to leave the matter as it is despite his regret. Heston objected strongly, reminding him of the terrible suffering he endures because of the curse, and suggested stealing the relic from the saint without her knowledge. But Hildian rejected the idea entirely to avoid complicating things more if they were caught, claiming his ability to bear the pain. But in that moment, Hildian stopped suddenly. So Heston asked him anxiously if the pain had intensified on him, so Hildian denied that, confirming that the opposite is what happened. He told him that the pain had retreated, and its intensity eased significantly, which aroused their wonder. Heston wondered in amazement if just presence near the holy relic was enough to receive its energy and be purified from the curse. But Hildian excluded that, explaining that if the matter were so, he would have felt improvement as soon as he went to the temple. So Heston wondered about the true explanation then. Hildian recalled what just happened, and remembered the moment Rowella extended her hand and touched his shoulder, claiming the presence of dust stuck there, to realize that this touch might be the secret behind the retreat of the curse's pain. Hildian wondered in his heart whether her abilities as a saint were the real reason behind easing his pains. Meanwhile, Heston was asking Hildian in amazement if the young lady had ever acted as a true saint, pointing out what he heard of rumors about her constant evasion of her responsibilities. Hildian denied that calmly, then asked his subordinate to redo the investigation and search carefully about Saint Rowella's personality. After she ran quickly to flee from the situation, Rowella finally reached her carriage while panting, to find her maid, Jane, waiting for her in great anxiety for her delay. Rowella apologized kindly, and when the maid asked her about the jewelry she went out to sell, she claimed in confusion that the merchants didn't offer her the suitable price, forcing her to leave without selling them. The maid suggested selling them in another place the next day, to be shocked by her mistress's plan to go out again, warning her of the dire consequences if the Duke discovered the matter of this secret sneaking. But Rowella reassured her with confidence and a wide smile, confirming she succeeded in sneaking today, and thus, she will be able to go out tomorrow without anyone discovering her matter. After she returned to her palace, she was surprised by the Duke's shadow standing directly behind her, wondering strictly about her destination, especially as there was no scheduled outing for her on that day. Rowella realized with horror she fell into a big trouble, and cursed in her secret the moment of her bragging that dropped her into this predicament before her strict father. She tried to justify her position with tension and a confused smile, explaining she went out to sell jewelry in order to provide the donation funds she talked about previously. The Duke disapproved of her going out herself instead of sending the servants, so she answered him she wanted to do that personally as a first step for atoning for her past mistakes. But the Duke glared at her with a sharp look full of doubt, wondering sharply whether this was the only reason that pushed her to go to the dangerous Bastion area. Rowella was struck from his knowledge of her destination and wondered in confusion and shock about the way her matter was exposed despite her extreme caution. He removed her confusion, explaining that a message had arrived from the royal palace, stating that the crown prince had purified the Bastion area personally the previous day, and that he saw her there. The message stated that the saint visited the area alone without guards, and when she was subjected to danger by the bandits, the crown prince intervened to save her. The message also included a conclusion that the saint returned quickly and loaded with a holy relic, suggesting they suspected she risked her life and headed there secretly after she felt its presence. She felt shock and embarrassment at the same time, realizing that hiding her identity didn't work before the crown prince, while the Duke completed his talk expressing his understanding and appreciation in her capacity as the saint for her desire to protect the holy relic. But his tone soon turned to overwhelming anger as he scolded her severely for her recklessness and going to a very dangerous place alone, wondering what would have happened if harm befell her and demanding her to accompany guards or resort to him in the next times. The Duke pointed with his finger towards her, emphasizing his orders, so Rowella nodded in agreement while she was still under the influence of the surprise, wondering in her secret shyly if he was really worried about her. The Duke's fear calmed, and he offered her that he handle the matter of selling the remaining jewelry, so Rowella thanked him with a wide smile, realizing that his scolding was stemming from his fear for her, and hoped he would help her also in the matter of the holy relic. She decided to exploit the opportunity, so she asked her father about the optimal procedure for handling the holy relic, and the Duke answered her with confidence that it's natural for her to keep it in her capacity as the saint. Rowella disapproved of the idea in wonder, so the Duke asked her if there was what prevents that. Rowella justified her position that her divine power is weak and her reputation is bad, which might stir people's concern if she kept it, suggesting handing it over to the temple, but the Duke rejected that strongly, confirming again that she is the saint, and that questioning her is considered an insult to gods and a betrayal to the empire and the royal family together. The Duke explained that the temple's view of her had begun to change after this incident, pointing to a message that arrived early that morning. The message carried the temple's seal and included an official invitation from the high priest asking for a meeting with the saint. Rowella looked at the message in confusion, wondering about the reason for this sudden invitation, especially as she remembers from the novel's events that the original Rowella's relationship with the temple was not good at all. The Duke pointed out she hadn't visited the temple since her official announcement as a saint, and gave her the choice between going or refusal if the matter bothered her, leaving her freedom of decision. Rowella grabbed the message thinking that Victor's impression of her had improved, but the high priest and the rest of the priests might not have changed their view yet, making her see in this invitation a golden opportunity that cannot be compensated. Rowella announced with enthusiasm her decision to go to the temple, determined to show the extent of the change that occurred in her personality to improve her deteriorating reputation, and planned at the same time to inspect the wishing fountain project she suggested. Indeed, she headed to the great temple, where the high priest welcomed her with a calm smile, welcoming her after a long absence and checking on her conditions, before he thanked her for answering this old man's invitation. Rowella responded to the high priest's welcome with a polite smile, insisting that she was the one who should thank him for the invitation, and asked how he had been. She thought to herself that this was nearly their first meeting, so she had to greet him with as much courtesy as possible to leave a good impression. The high priest replied with a broad, cheerful smile, expressing his immense joy these days, and then invited her to sit. Rowella thanked him and took the seat he indicated. Once seated, she presented him with a small box and opened it to reveal a glowing stone, explaining that this was the artifact she had recovered the previous day. The high priest was admired by the holy aura emanating from the stone, confirming it was indeed a sacred artifact, and mentioned he had heard of her heroic deed from the imperial palace, and how she had bravely protected the relic even though her life was threatened by bandits. Rowella laughed shyly and downplayed what she had done, considering it something that didn't deserve all this praise, while secretly wondering exactly what Hildian had said to make it sound like such a grand, heroic act. The high priest asked to examine the relic closely, and Rowella immediately agreed, but as soon as he held it, his expression suddenly changed and he appeared extremely tense. With a shocked voice, he announced that this piece was not a relic of the goddess Lucera, but rather a relic of the evil god Ahotep, which left Ruella stunned and shocked. He explained that the relics of the goddess Lucera emit a holy aura that purifies its surroundings. In complete contrast, the relics of the evil god Ahotep emit a wicked, harmful aura, and thus they are destroyed as soon as they are discovered. Ruella felt a surge of panic deep down, realizing she had brought something this dangerous directly into the temple, and that this situation would ruin her attempt to leave a good impression, assuring herself that she hadn't intended any harm. However, in a total surprise, the High Priest's expression shifted from shock to intense admiration. He held the relic while trembling, declaring loudly that it was truly magnificent, leaving Ruella in complete confusion. The High Priest explained his reaction, clarifying that he had thought she went there based on a divine revelation to recover a relic of Lucera, but he now realized she had gone specifically to retrieve the dangerous relic of Ahotep to eliminate the threat it posed. He then added with awe, as he held the relic which was now emitting a warm light, that she hadn't just recovered it, but had actually already purified it. Ruella wondered in astonishment if she was the one who purified the relic, and the High Priest enthusiastically confirmed it, considering her a truly wonderful saint. Ruella tried to remember when she had done that, but she could find no memory of it in her mind. Then, a memory from the previous night flashed in her mind, when she was wrapping the relic to present it and felt a strange warmth emanating from it, and she wondered if that moment was the purification process. Ruella laughed awkwardly, feeling embarrassed by this praise for an act she didn't intend, so she told him she thanked him for his appreciation, but that what happened was a mere coincidence. The High Priest noticed she seemed somewhat discouraged, even though the evil aura had already vanished. Ruella appeared heartbroken, unable to lift her head. The High Priest thought that the harsh gazes of people and the rumors surrounding her must have affected her deeply, and that her past actions might have stemmed from her discomfort in her role as a saint, and that her true nature wasn't bad. He saw in his heart that she now possessed all the qualities of a true saint, and told her that the purification process is not something anyone can do, and that what she accomplished was truly remarkable. He then placed his hand on his chest and declared with full confidence that she was undoubtedly a wonderful saint, and that he guaranteed it in his capacity as the High Priest. Ruella was confused by his sudden seriousness, thinking to herself that she had said all those things as a safety net, so that later, if she were exposed as a fake saint, she could say she had told them from the beginning. She thanked him nervously for his exaggerated praise, while the High Priest thought that words alone might not be enough to encourage her. An idea sparkled in his eyes, and he wondered if there was something that could show the people the saint's miracle and even change her own view of herself. He suddenly rose from his seat and asked her enthusiastically if she had mentioned she would build a wishing fountain, to which Ruella replied in the affirmative. He suggested holding a grand opening ceremony for the fountain so that on that day she could show her new self to everyone. Ruella hesitated, wondering if people would avoid attending if they knew she was the one who built the fountain, and suggested she watch from behind the scenes. But Victor enthusiastically supported the High Priest's idea, and the High Priest rejoiced at his agreement. The High Priest approached her with even greater enthusiasm, asking her to focus on completing the fountain, and that the temple would take full charge of organizing the ceremony for her sake, making her unable to refuse. Ruella smiled secretly. She had originally come to the temple to talk about the fountain, but she didn't expect them to bring it up first and with such enthusiasm, so she reluctantly agreed to leave the matter in their hands, wondering if things were going well. Ruella felt a great sense of relief. She had been worried about how to promote the fountain after finishing its construction, but since the temple would handle the ceremony, a huge burden was lifted off her shoulders. Ruella thought that this matter not only saved her a lot of trouble, but if she showed everyone how much she had changed on that day, it would also help improve her reputation. Accordingly, she began planning what she would wear and what she would say at the ceremony. But while she was lost in her thoughts, a familiar voice called her in a mocking tone. Ruella raised her head to be surprised by the owner of the voice, who expressed her astonishment at seeing her in the temple, a place she never expected them to meet. It was her cousin Helena, standing before her with a forced smile, asking provocatively why she was here, reminding her that she had always hated coming to the temple. Helena continued her mockery, wondering if she had been summoned again because of her bullying of the priests. Ruella responded calmly and, in turn, asked why she was at the temple today, despite having no connection to it. But something caught Ruella's attention. Her gaze shifted to the priest standing next to Helena. Her eyes widened in surprise when she realized his identity. At first glance, she thought he was Morgan Cyber, the wanted con artist who had deceived her, but she quickly corrected herself, realizing he was his older brother. Owen Cyber. Owen stepped toward her and bowed politely, greeting her by saying he hadn't seen her in a long time and apologizing on behalf of his younger brother for the great offense he had committed against her. Ruella frowned with annoyance, remembering she had indeed heard that the Count's eldest son had become a priest. Her memory returned to what she knew about him. He was on the verge of being expelled from his family due to his gambling addiction, but he was sent to the temple because he possessed divine power. And then she remembered how he had completely disassociated himself from his brother. Ruella told Owen she preferred he not talk about his brother and the other, remarked sarcastically that he had apparently committed another offense. Ruella looked at them both, thinking that she didn't know why Helena was with this man, but staying with them would only sour her mood. Meanwhile, Owen apologized on Helena's behalf, saying she was a bit harsh. The pair completely ignored Ruella and began whispering, so she felt resentful of their childish behavior and decided to move on and ignore them. She turned to leave, announcing that she would be going now. But Helena suddenly grabbed her arm and pleaded with her not to go and to help them, revealing in a worried voice that the spiritual beast had escaped. Ruella stopped in her tracks and turned toward her in shock, asking what this spiritual beast was. Helena explained that Priest Owen had opened the door of the sanctuary to show her the beast, but it had slipped through a small gap and escaped in an instant. Helena looked tense as she said they were desperately searching for it now, but searching this vast temple was difficult for them alone. Then she asked Ruella, as the saint, to help them with her power, which sparked Ruella's ire as she thought that the spiritual beast was a sacred creature managed directly by the temple, wondering how they could handle it with such negligence. Ruella fumed inwardly. Above all else, Helena was now asking for her help to find it, and she wondered what was wrong with these people. Owen intervened, addressing Helena, saying he understood her feelings, but it would be difficult to ask for the lady's help, so Helena asked him why. Owen explained with a cunning smile that the spiritual beast is extremely wary of those with weak divine power, and since the lady had not yet shown her power properly, it would be impossible for her to deal with it. He added that they should be more considerate of her feelings, while it was clear they were both mocking her. Ruella was enraged, fully realizing what they were implying, that she was just a hollow saint with weak power and would be nothing but a hindrance in the search for the spiritual beast. Helena pretended to defend her, saying the priest was only thinking of her best interest, and Owen replied that if the lady understood it that way, it was his fault. Ruella sighed inwardly, realizing these two were perfectly aligned when it came to taunting her. Ruella noticed many priests watching the situation and thought she would like to ignore the spiritual beast and everything else. But the presence of all these witnesses made it impossible, and she realized this was exactly what Helena was aiming for. Ruella thought that Helena had orchestrated this situation in front of everyone so she couldn't refuse. If she refused her request, or even if she accepted and failed to find the beast, it was clear she would find herself drowned in bad rumors once again. Ruella sighed in frustration and realized she had no other choice in this annoying situation. Ruella agreed to their request, saying she would help them, which surprised Helena and Owen, who didn't expect her to agree so easily. Then she added with a confident smile and a condescending tone that she would graciously grant her kindness to these two miserable souls and would help find the spiritual beast herself. After making her big promise, Ruella began wandering the temple gardens, searching everywhere. But she soon wondered in confusion where she was supposed to search, as all she knew about this beast was that it took the form of a cat. She recalled one of her lessons, where she learned that spiritual beasts take the form of cats and are managed by the temple, and that cats are gentle. She sat on the edge of one of the stone basins feeling frustrated. She had already searched high places like trees because cats love them, but found nothing, and began to regret accepting this bet. She remembered how Owen had challenged her, saying he wouldn't be easy on her just because she was the saint, and that the one who failed to find the beast must admit their incompetence and step down, and how in a moment of anger she had agreed to the bet without thinking. But she soon gathered her resolve and decided not to give up, and began thinking again about other things cats love, ruling out the idea of canned tuna existing in this world. Here, she remembered the existence of a certain plant that resembled what she was looking for and tried to recall its name. Her eyes sparkled when she found the plant in front of her, realizing it wasn't just a similar plant, but real catnip, the plant that cats adore. And a sign next to it warned not to touch it because it was intended only for spiritual beasts. A wide, triumphant smile formed on her face, and she felt certain she could win this bet. Meanwhile, Owen and his priests were searching another part of the gardens but found nothing, which fueled Owen's anger and frustration. Owen shouted at the priests angrily, ordering them to hurry and search elsewhere, and to find the spiritual beast before the saint did. Owen stood cursing the spiritual beast that had escaped and made things difficult, and wondered anxiously if that woman would find it first. His memory returned to the moment his father scolded him for wasting his money on gambling and ordered him to go to the temple to become a priest. He remembered his father's warning that this was his last chance, so he clenched his hand in malice, thinking he couldn't allow both brothers to be expelled from the Count's house because of that lady, and vowed to teach her a lesson this time. Meanwhile, Ruella had placed an empty box near the catnip plant. The fragrance in the box attracted the spiritual beast, which appeared as a beautiful cat and jumped inside the box. With a triumphant smile, Ruella pounced on the cat and caught it, declaring she had finally captured it. She held the cat in her arms, thinking that cats indeed love catnip and boxes, then addressed the cat, saying she was the one who had escaped from the sanctuary, and asked it to come with her. Ruella noticed the cat remained calmer in her lap than she expected. The cat began to purr and rub against her, making Ruella wonder if Helena's claim that the beast hates people with weak divine power was just a trick. Ruella felt grateful for the cat's calmness and decided to go now to strip Owen of his priest's robe and win the bet. Meanwhile, one of the priests was running toward Owen, shouting that they had found the beast. Owen rushed forward eagerly, asking where it was. He arrived to see Ruella holding the cat in her arms. The priest told him that the saint had already found the spiritual beast. So Ruella asked him calmly if this was the little one he was looking for, expressing her happiness that she found it so quickly. Owen was shocked and asked her how she managed to find it. Ruella innocently claimed she was just standing in the garden and that it came to her on its own. And one of the priests commented that the beast probably recognized the saint. Owen exploded in anger, shouting and asking if this was logical, for the priest had searched the entire temple and couldn't find it. Ruella took a step toward him and reminded him of his previous words about how the spiritual beast is wary of those with weak divine power, then lifted the cat toward him and said coldly that he simply wasn't chosen. Suddenly, the spiritual beast turned to attack, emitting a dark aura as it growled and scratched Owen with its claws, and Owen screamed in pain and terror. Ruella hugged the calm cat again and asked with clear sarcasm if it was painful for it to see someone with insufficient divine power. Then she gently reassured it that everything was fine now. The priests present began whispering in admiration, expressing their surprise that they couldn't find the beast no matter how they searched, while she managed to do so. Not only that, but they noticed how easily she calmed it, leading them to acknowledge her as the true saint and wonder about the greatness of her divine power. Ruella announced calmly that she would return this little one to the sanctuary herself, justifying it by saying it would be annoying if someone else got hurt because of it again, in a clear reference to Owen. Then she turned toward him with a cunning smile and mockingly asked if she had said something unnecessary, especially to someone who was no longer a priest. Owen fell to his knees, trembling with rage and humiliation, secretly cursing that detestable girl, Lady Ruella. Ruella reminded him that a bet is a bet, but she added a veiled threat, wondering what might happen if the high priest discovered they had neglected the management of the spiritual beast. She then added with a confident smile that they must have been incredibly lucky to meet her in the hallway by chance. She directed her speech directly to Helena, who was standing frozen, and asked her if she was right, causing Helena to flinch. Helena tried to hide her confusion with a nervous laugh and answered stutteringly that she was right, of course, and thanked her for her help. Ruella didn't care for her thanks and thought to herself, seeing Helena's forced smile, that she must feel humiliated and frustrated because things didn't go as she planned. As she was walking away, she stopped to offer Helena one last piece of advice, saying she should try something like this at least once. She approached her and whispered in her ear that knowing one's weaknesses and asking for help is nothing to be ashamed of, then asked if she understood. Ruella smiled secretly as she walked away, thinking that this lesson would keep things quiet for a while. Then she gave her a final warning that she would be leaving now, and that it was better for Helena to stop the foolish behavior and stay quiet from now on. After leaving, Ruella began wandering the temple carrying the spiritual beast, but she was surprised because she couldn't find the sanctuary Victor had mentioned anywhere. She looked at the cat in her arms and playfully asked if it knew where the sanctuary was. Then she scolded herself for her silliness. How could she talk to a cat and expect an answer? But at that moment, the cat jumped from her arms. The cat suddenly took off running, so Ruella cried out after it in surprise, asking where it was going. Ruella hurried to catch up, marveling at its sudden run after it had been sitting quietly the whole time, wondering if it really knew the way to the sanctuary, and asked it to slow down so they could go together. She felt angry, thinking about how difficult it was to catch this spiritual beast, and that if she lost it now, she would end up like that fool Owen. She decided that this must never happen and continued chasing the cat, asking it to wait. She stopped suddenly, panting, realizing she had run after the cat without thinking and that she now didn't know where she was. She found herself in front of an old, cracked building covered in climbing plants, and wondered in confusion if there was such a place in the temple. She felt anxious. If she didn't find her way back soon, she would surely get lost, and wondered in the midst of all this where that cat had gone. She heard a meowing sound and glimpsed the cat's tail disappearing into one of the corridors. She ran toward it, shouting that she found it and asked it to "Stop running." But she stopped in her tracks when she saw the cat sitting next to a person lying on the ground, and she cautiously wondered about his identity. Her eyes widened in extreme shock when she recognized his features, realizing he was the Crown Prince. Going back an hour, in the High Priest's office, he was apologizing to the Crown Prince, explaining that there was nothing he could do to solve the problem. The High Priest explained that he didn't know the type of this curse, but even his divine power had no effect, and that this matter could not be underestimated. Despite this, the Crown Prince asked him for help, explaining that even if he couldn't remove the curse, easing the pain would be enough, so the High Priest agreed to look for a solution quietly. The High Priest suggested that the saint might be able to help, noting that she mastered the power of purification, so Hildian inquired in surprise if he meant Lady Ruella. The High Priest confirmed the matter and told him that she had come early in the morning and showed him an artifact she recovered from Bastion, which turned out to belong to the evil god Ahotep, and that she had already purified it. Hildian repeated his words in shock, so the High Priest explained to him that if she truly possessed this level of divine power, she might be able to significantly suppress His Highness's curse. Based on that, the High Priest suggested that His Highness try to ask for help from the saint. Later, the Crown Prince was standing alone, thinking that the disappearance of his pain for a few moments the last time was not just a coincidence. But the question of whether he could trust her enough to tell her the truth about his curse was a completely different matter. Suddenly, the pain struck him again with force, and a dark aura spread around him as he clutched his chest in agony. He staggered from the intensity of the pain, thinking desperately that he hadn't brought Heston with him, and that if he lost consciousness here, he would be in real trouble. He tried to resist the pain and force himself to stay awake, but in the end, he collapsed and lost consciousness. At that moment, Ruella found him lying on the ground, so she rushed toward him, shouting for him to wake up. She touched his forehead, noticing the cold sweat covering his face, and asked him anxiously if he was okay and where the pain was. The Crown Prince slowly opened his eyes and recognized her voice, wondering in confusion if she was the saint. He asked her in astonishment why she was there, and she replied in confusion that this wasn't a dream, and that she was the one who should ask why he had collapsed in this place. He tried to get up but writhed in pain, sparking panic in Ruella, who called him anxiously. Ruella realized she wouldn't be able to carry him herself, so she decided to go call for help. But before she could leave, he grabbed her wrist firmly to stop her. He remembered how the pain in his body had eased and breathing became easier when he was near her the last time, and wondered if this truly was her power as a saint. He pleaded with her not to go and asked her to touch him. He repeated his plea, which struck Ruella with profound shock. She wondered in shock what this kind person was saying, affected by the euphemism filter even in her thoughts, and thought that he seemed perfectly normal before, but now she saw him as a complete pervert. She scolded him, asking if he realized the state of his body and that this was no time for jokes. But he interrupted her, insisting that this was why he was saying it, and asked her at least to touch his back. Ruella wondered in confusion if he was asking her to rub his back to ease the pain a bit, just like mothers do when they say, "My mother's hand is a healing hand," and rub their suffering child's belly. Although she thought she could do that, she wondered if it was better to call a doctor now, then told him she would do as he asked. But he had to let go of her hand first. As soon as he fell to the ground, she saw that insect she had seen previously on his back once again. She wondered in terror if this was another mission, but was surprised that the status window didn't appear anywhere. However, she felt that there was something strange about that insect. She wondered in concern if it had been this large the last time she saw it, while the Crown Prince was in severe pain. Her memory returned to the events of the original novel, where Hildian suddenly begins suffering from a curse of unknown origin. Ultimately, the curse consumes him, causing him to lose his mind and turn into a state of rage and madness. Ruella connected the events, wondering as she thought of the insect she saw on his shoulder last time if this glitch was linked to Hildian's curse. Ruella stared at that strange insect resting on the Crown Prince's back, and a terrifying thought occurred to her. If her conclusion was correct and she left this insect alone until he lost his mind, then that would inevitably lead him to the same tragic and bloody end that befell him in the original novel. But she soon brushed these thoughts from her head, convincing herself that the matter of his rampage was a future problem, and that she simply couldn't ignore someone suffering in front of her eyes now. So she asked him to wait a moment and reached out her hand toward him. Ruella placed her hand gently on his back, and within moments, the black insect began to fade and fade under her touch, and she smiled with relief at the success of the matter. She asked him in a voice full of concern how he felt now and if he had become okay, while the Crown Prince was still kneeling looking at her in astonishment. Hildian rose slowly, signs of relief appearing on him, and sighed deeply, confirming that he felt better and more stable now. He took her hands gently and gratefully, looking directly into her eyes to thank her for her help, which sparked Ruella's surprise and tension. Ruella stepped back a step in shyness and confusion from his sudden approach, and stammered that it was lucky his condition wasn't serious enough to call a doctor. At that moment, the familiar system voice rang in her head, and a glowing blue window appeared before her, drawing her attention away from him. The window announced the success of her hidden mission by removing the insect from Hildian's back, and granted her 3 points as an increase in reputation, noting that the target's pain had receded. So Ruella realized that his pain was indeed linked to that insect, and that the word receded meant the curse hadn't completely disappeared. She looked at him again, thinking that as long as the insect had been removed for now, he should be in good condition. She contemplated his features after he regained his posture and adjusted his appearance, noticing clearly that the color had returned to his face and he looked much better than before. She thought about the dire consequences that would have happened if she hadn't come to this place by chance searching for the spiritual beast, and how Hildian would have faced the danger of the rampage alone here, or perhaps worse, which was to die alone in such a deserted place without anyone by his side, a fate she felt in her heart she never wanted to see. Ruella broke the silence and sincerely asked him to turn to her if this situation ever happened to him again. Though he was surprised at first, he nodded in agreement, while she secretly admitted she wasn't a doctor but would do her best to help him. Ruella then wondered about the reason for the Crown Prince's presence alone in this isolated place without guards or servants, and asked him curiously if he was on another secret inspection tour, despite her realization that his luxury clothes didn't match this assumption. Hildian looked away with some embarrassment, then renewed his thanks to her and kindly asked her to keep the matter of his presence here a secret, which sparked her surprise and prompted her to ask him why. He explained to her that this abandoned temple was a place he discovered by chance in his childhood, and that he used to come to it from time to time when he wanted to clear his mind. And because it was a place no one went to, he preferred it to remain unknown to others. Ruella smiled and considered this place like a secret base for him, thinking that he had a nice side, and promised him she wouldn't tell anyone. So he breathed a sigh of relief and thanked her, before asking her in turn why she was here. Shock hit her like a thunderbolt at his question, and her eyes widened in terror as she remembered the matter of the spiritual beast, which she had completely forgotten in the midst of these events. She turned right and left eagerly and in panic searching for the beast, telling Hildian it was here just now, wondering where it disappeared to, and praying it hadn't run far away in that short moment. In the midst of her search, the cat appeared slowly from behind her dress and stretched calmly on the grass as if nothing had happened. Ruella quickly picked it up and held it high with joy, thanking it for not running away, while Hildian stood stunned, wondering why a spiritual beast was in this place. Ruella laughed awkwardly and explained to him that she got lost and ended up here while trying to return the beast to the sanctuary, while Hildian contemplated the situation in silence, remembering that spiritual beasts don't follow people easily, but this beast seemed perfectly comfortable in her arms, as if it were following its true owner, while Ruella was stroking the cat and telling it that time to go home had come. Ruella asked the Crown Prince if he knew the location of the spiritual creature's sanctuary, and he replied that he had only heard of its existence inside the temple and didn't know it was so unknown to everyone. Ruella sighed in despair and realized she would have to ask the High Priest, thinking that she never expected to see him twice in one day after just finishing her discussion with him about the holy relic and the fountain, which made Hildian pay attention to the word fountain. Ruella announced that she must leave now and asked him anxiously if he would be okay alone. Hildian apologized for detaining her all this time and reassured her that his assistant was waiting outside, asking her not to worry about him and to go on her way. Ruella looked at him hesitantly, wondering to herself if it was really safe to leave him alone, but she noticed again that his skin had regained its freshness, so she concluded he would indeed be okay. Ruella excused herself politely and turned quickly to return, carrying the spiritual beast, while Hildian remained standing in his place, watching her figure as she moved away. Hildian regained his composure after the pain vanished and looked at Ruella calmly, confirming to her that he had become okay and expressing his hope that he would have the chance to meet the saint again soon. After Ruella's return to the Duke's palace, a sudden scream arose from one of the maids who was surprised to see a small creature yawning, wondering in astonishment what this thing was. The maid, Jane, was placing her hands on her reddened cheeks from intense admiration, expressing her extreme fondness for how cute this creature was, to the point that she felt her heart would stop, especially seeing it yawn and rub its eyes innocently. Jane spoke to her mistress, expressing her surprise, as she didn't expect the lady to go to the Great Temple and return with a cat, and Ruella replied that she too didn't expect it to end up like this. Ruella sat stroking the cat with a gentle smile, trying to think of a suitable name for it, while thinking in her heart about the strangeness of the situation, as she never imagined bringing a spiritual beast to her home. Her memory returned to what happened in the temple. After she managed to catch the beast, she returned to the high priest to ask him about the way to the sanctuary, but he received her with extreme awe, praising her greatness as a saint and confirming that in all his years of service, he had never seen a spiritual beast follow someone with such intimacy and love. Ruella pointed out to the high priest that the spiritual beast's condition didn't look good, so the priest explained to her that normally the priest in charge provides the beast with divine energy weekly to prevent its weakness. When the high priest asked about the identity of the priest in charge, it turned out to be Owen, which made Ruella fuming inwardly, realizing that negligent priest had completely abandoned his responsibilities toward the sacred creature. The high priest tried to reach out his hand to check the beast, but the small creature lunged fiercely and made an angry sound as it swiped the priest's hand away. Ruella pulled the beast into her lap gently, while the high priest noticed that the creature rejected his touch as well, explaining that restoring its depleted divine energy requires pure, holy power. In a surprise that stunned Ruella, the high priest politely asked her to take over the care of the spiritual beast for a period of time. Ruella tried to stammer a refusal, but the high priest interrupted her with a confident smile, assuring her that her great abilities made caring for the spiritual beast easy for her. With a wide smile that brooked no argument, the high priest announced the handing over of the spiritual beast's custody to the saint, expressing his complete trust in her and reliance on her. Back in her room, Ruella stood contemplating the situation, realizing she had officially become responsible for this spiritual beast. But she convinced herself that this matter might be a winning deal if it contributed to raising her status and reputation inside the temple. Jane asked her if the Duke had agreed to keep the creature in the palace, and Ruella confirmed to her that he agreed immediately and surprisingly as soon as she explained the situation to him. Ruella remembered how the Duke tried to hide his admiration for the little beast by coughing lightly, and told her with paternal sternness to take good care of it as long as the temple had agreed, while he was filled with secret pride that his daughter had gained the temple's recognition for her ability to care for a sacred creature. Jane suggested they choose a name for the spiritual beast, noting that calling it cat or spiritual creature only seemed strange and inappropriate. Ruella thought long and hard about a suitable name, deciding to choose a simple and ordinary name so she wouldn't get too attached to it, to avoid feeling sad when the time for parting came. After a moment of thought, she looked at the little beast and called it Gelly, and the creature responded to her with a cute wink and a cheerful meow. Jane was overjoyed when she saw Gelly's response to the name, considering that the creature liked its new name, and Ruella smiled with relief at the success of the matter. Ruella stroked Gelly's head with tenderness and whispered to it that its stay with her might be short, but she begged it to take care of her during this period. Suddenly, this quiet moment was interrupted by the maid, Mary, bursting into the room quickly, apologizing for her sudden entry. Mary was panting while carrying a wooden tray with a black sealed letter, and told her mistress she must see this matter immediately, as an urgent letter had arrived from the imperial palace, specifically from the Crown Prince. Ruella was greatly surprised upon hearing the Crown Prince's name, and picked up the letter amidst the whispers of the maids who wondered curiously why the Crown Prince was messaging their mistress. Ruella initially expected the letter to be just words of thanks and simple greetings related to what happened between them in the abandoned temple. But her features changed completely when she read the content of the letter, where the Crown Prince asked that they meet face-to-face to discuss a certain matter privately. Ruella realized with fear and confusion that the arrival of an official letter from the Imperial Palace with this content meant the Crown Prince was extending an official invitation for her to come to the palace. The Crown Prince explained in his letter that he learned by chance of the donation fountain project she was adopting, and that he found himself very interested in this unique method of donation that hadn't occurred to his mind before. He added in his letter that if she hadn't yet settled on a place to build the fountain, he believed he could recommend an excellent site, renewing his desire to discuss this matter with her personally. Ruella stood holding the letter while drowned in her confusion, wondering how the news of the fountain reached him so quickly. Although she admitted she hadn't chosen the site yet, she couldn't understand the reason that pushed the Crown Prince to exert all this effort to help her. Ruella wondered in her confusion about the interest the Crown Prince might gain from this offer. Soon, an idea jumped to her mind, making her wonder if he was testing her ability to break his curse. She remembered how his pain clearly eased when she touched him that day, so she concluded with certainty that his offer to help in the fountain project was only a pretext so he could use her power to get rid of the curse that exhausted him. Despite that, she felt anxiety squeezing her heart, for she realized she was able to remove those small insects. But that didn't represent a radical solution to the problem, and since she realized her truth as a fake saint, she feared she had given him false hope. Her thoughts were interrupted by the curiosity of her two maids, who eagerly asked her about the content of the Crown Prince's letter, and she answered them calmly that it was just a simple invitation to meet and talk. The two maids were overjoyed and assumed with a dreamy imagination that the Crown Prince had taken a liking to their mistress and invited her personally, while Ruella completely dismissed this idea in her heart, certain that his interest lay only in her power. The two maids continued their persistence, asking curiously if she would accept the invitation, so Ruella sank into deep thought. A confident smile formed on her lips, convinced that whatever his offer was, she had nothing to lose. She saw that accepting this invitation was a smart step to speed up the completion of her tasks, and that there was no justification for refusing it. With enthusiasm, she announced to her two maids her agreement to go and asked them to bring paper and a pen to write the reply. The next day, Ruella headed to the majestic Crown Prince's palace. There, she bowed elegantly before Hildian, greeting him with respect, and introduced herself as the daughter of Duke Breda, thanking him for his kind invitation. Hildian returned the greeting with a welcoming smile, confirming that the thanks went to her for accepting the invitation, then gestured for her to enter the palace. Ruella accompanied him inside, thinking that this was the third meeting between them, but she admitted to herself some tension, given that it was the first official meeting between them. Hildian noticed her frequent glances, so he stopped and asked her in surprise if there was something wrong, or if there was something stuck to his face. Ruella realized she might have been staring at him excessively, so she rectified the situation with a gentle laugh, claiming her happiness at meeting him privately was what made her look that way. Her reply caused confusion for Hildian, who coughed lightly, trying to hide his shyness, making Ruella wonder in confusion if she had uttered something strange that sparked this interaction. They sat together around a table full of sweets and tea. Ruella initiated by asking about his affairs, and he confirmed with a smile that he was fine, renewing his deep thanks for her great help to him on that day. She asked him if his invitation was considered an expression of gratitude for what happened, and he answered her calmly that the matter wasn't necessarily so, but rather that he knew of her sincere intentions and his desire to support her noble plans. Ruella thought secretly that his way of talking seemed traditional and a bit cliché, but she painted a wide smile and told him that her project wasn't that great, thanking him for his high appreciation of her efforts. Hildian moved on to talk about the project, wondering about the site she intended to choose for the fountain, and suggested the Vention area to her, explaining it was a commercial area located on the borders of Bastion alleys. Ruella shivered as soon as she heard the name Bastion and remembered the scary gang leader. So Hildian nodded, confirming it was the same place they met for the first time. He began explaining to her that that area was originally a vital center for merchants, before criminals flocked to it and turned it into a black market. But he reassured her that after capturing the area's leader, Sharon, last time, the imperial family is now working hard to revive trade and security in that area, promising her they would return it to its previous prosperity, and even better than it was, and asked her not to worry about it being a bad site. Ruella listened to his confident words and was certain he had indeed invited her to discuss the fountain project and offer help. In her heart, she didn't care much about the site of the fountain, for all that mattered to her was finishing the construction. However, she feigned hesitation and told him the difficulty of giving him a definitive answer at the current time, pushing him to wonder about the reason. She justified her position by saying she didn't know the Vention area well, and that her first quick visit to Bastion wasn't enough to judge the entire place. She confirmed to him that this project carried paramount importance for her, so she preferred to conduct a field inspection of the site before making any decision, and asked him to provide her with the exact location so she could visit it herself. The Crown Prince agreed with her viewpoint, confirming she was entirely right, and that this matter was too important to make a decision about without inspecting the site first. Based on that, he suggested they discuss the details after seeing the site and offered to set another appointment for him personally to guide her to the place, which sparked Ruella's surprise as she wondered in surprise if His Highness would really guide her himself. Ruella tried to apologize politely, explaining she could go alone and there was no need for His Highness to waste his time, but he insisted on his position, justifying it by saying he was the one who suggested the matter first, and it was right that he take the first step, confirming that trust is an essential matter in any dealing. He repeated his request that she allow him to guide her, so Ruella hesitated as she thought about his offer. In her heart, Ruella saw she wouldn't lose anything by accepting the offer. Rather, she was feeling some fear about wandering alone in that area, for fear of being exposed to a situation similar to what happened with Sharon. Therefore, after she made up her mind, Ruella bowed slightly and told him she would be in his care, for she saw there was no real reason for refusal, and that getting some help might be useful. So the Crown Prince promised her with a smile to leave the matter to him. Ruella announced she would take her leave now, and that she looked forward to their meeting at the next appointment. When she moved to leave, the Crown Prince offered to accompany her to her carriage, but she told him there was no need for him to go to that extent. But suddenly, Ruella stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in shock as she noticed the presence of a small black insect on the crown prince's shoulder. She cried out, wondering if this was happening again, which sparked his extreme confusion. Ruella quickly rectified the situation and placed her hand on her mouth, claiming there was nothing, while her thoughts were clashing in panic, wondering how that cursed insect had appeared again after it disappeared previously. She secretly compared this insect and the one she saw when he collapsed in the abandoned temple. Although it appeared smaller in size now, she was certain its presence would negatively affect his health, so the crown prince noticed her distraction and called her name. Driven by concern, she asked him directly about his condition at the current time, so he was surprised by her question and asked her what she meant. Ruella concluded through his facial expressions and movements that he didn't appear in a critical state as he was last time, but the reappearance of the insect in this short time sparked her concern. Ruella feared that if she left him in this state, and the insects accumulated and grew in size as happened in the past, the consequences would be dire. Therefore, she decided she couldn't ignore the matter, so she excused herself for a moment, then suddenly rushed toward him and hugged him tightly to be able to touch the place of the insect. The crown prince was completely shocked by her sudden act and called her name in astonishment. He asked her in confusion what she was doing, so she told him while holding on to him to wait a moment and stay still. The crown prince's face turned red with shyness as he wondered again what on earth she was trying to do. Ruella reminded him that he was the one who asked her to touch him last time, and that she was now just checking his condition. Then she began touching other places of his body, wondering if touching other places would help as a preventive measure, and asked him to relax. The crown prince was frozen in his place from extreme embarrassment, while Ruella thought that this situation would be catastrophic if someone saw them. Ruella continued touching him everywhere she could reach, considering she had to do what she could as a precautionary measure. After she succeeded in removing the insect, she moved back a bit and felt satisfied with its disappearance, confirming to herself that since she touched other places as prevention, he should be fine for some time. She asked him how he felt now, but she was surprised to see his face extremely red, and wondered in confusion about the reason for that. The crown prince stammered as he turned his face away, apologizing that he didn't know the reason. Then he asked her to step back a bit, and here Ruella suddenly realized the truth of what she had done, and her face went pale. Panic seized her, and she thought that she had touched the body of a member of the royal family recklessly, and that she was in such a hurry she didn't think of the consequences, so she hurried to offer a deep apology, confirming to him she didn't intend any bad intentions. The crown prince reassured her while still embarrassed, confirming he knew she acted out of concern for his health and thanked her for her care. Ruella breathed a sigh of relief and felt grateful for his big heart, for she feared he would push her away for her lack of respect. After things calmed down, she took her leave quickly and promised him she would meet him next time for him to show her the site, so he agreed and wished her a safe return. Ruella quickened her steps away, thinking she must escape before the atmosphere became stranger and more embarrassing. While the crown prince was watching her as she moved away, he was drowned in his thoughts, contemplating how Lady Ruella didn't hesitate for a moment to reach out her hand toward him, and unlike others, it seemed she didn't feel any discomfort or embarrassment in his presence. In fact, a slight smile formed on his face as he admitted in his heart that this kind of situation wasn't bad at all. But soon his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, and he stopped in his tracks when a woman suddenly appeared from behind him, wondering about the identity of the girl who had just left. He turned toward the woman quickly. The woman told him she noticed this was the first time he invited a young noble lady to the palace and asked him insistently about her identity. Annoyance appeared on the crown prince's face as he tried to change the subject, wondering how she had returned when he thought she had gone out today. That woman was none other than his mother, Empress Nikita Kairos. She was a woman far removed from traditional nobility constraints, focusing only on what sparked her interest and what she enjoyed. She was known in her youth for her free spirit, a personality she had retained until now. He remembered how she would suddenly announce her desire to travel to see the landmarks of a neighboring country, leaving the imperial palace without hesitation, which always sparked the confusion of those around her. And he had always felt envy toward this personality, which was the exact opposite of him. He who was barely surviving his life, confined in the rigid crown prince mold. The empress told him her schedule had finished earlier than she expected, then demanded sternly that he not change the subject and answer her question. The empress repeated her question curiously while directing her fan toward him, wondering about that girl's identity. The crown prince tried to evade answering, claiming there was nothing worth knowing and that it was just an ordinary meeting between nobles. He thought in his heart that he saw his mother's free personality in a positive light, but he also realized there was nothing more annoying than becoming a target for her curiosity. The empress wasn't convinced by his answer and pointed out that he usually tells her the details of his official meetings, but now he was trying to hide the matter skillfully. Then she surprised him with a direct question as to whether that girl was his girlfriend, which struck him with profound shock. The crown prince screamed, denying the matter strongly, but his mother looked at him with a cunning smile and eyes full of suspicion. He stammered in an attempt to defend himself, explaining they had met only 3 times and that one needs at least 10 meetings to become lovers. And here he realized he had fallen into her trap. The Empress pounced on his word, wondering, happily, if this meant if he met her 7 more times, he wanted her to be his girlfriend. Or perhaps this was a one-sided love, which sparked his extreme anger. The Empress burst into laughter and told him she would stop teasing him, but added playfully that despite him being her son, sparking his ire was truly enjoyable. The Crown Prince sighed in despair, realizing his mother would continue to pester him about this matter for some time, and that no matter how old he got, she would remain difficult to handle. But soon his interest shifted, and he wondered anxiously if the saint had managed to leave the imperial palace safely, which his mother noticed. The Empress watched him while he was distracted, noticed his facial expressions, and realized it was the first time she saw him in this state, concluding he wasn't completely uninterested in the matter. Her memory returned to Hildian's childhood, where he was always afraid of relationships with people, making him hesitant to allow anyone to approach him or to approach anyone himself. As a result, the only person who remained by his side was his assistant, Heston. The Empress sighed with regret, considering it truly unfortunate that her son was this handsome and this distant from others. But now, after the appearance of this young lady whom he followed with his gaze without realizing it, she felt astonished. A smile full of curiosity formed on her face, and she wondered about the type of young lady who managed to capture her son's attention, considering the matter truly interesting. Meanwhile, on her way back, Ruella was sitting in her carriage feeling extreme exhaustion, thinking that getting rid of the Crown Prince's insects was more tiring than she expected. Then she wondered to herself if the exhaustion stemmed from her private and solitary meeting with the Crown Prince, for staying in the same place with a handsome man for a long time is an exhausting matter in itself. She sighed while thinking she had a lot to do. The sight problem had been solved, but she still had to find a sculptor to carve the fountain. And because the tension had vanished, she felt sleepiness overcoming her, so she decided to close her eyes for a bit until she reached the palace. But suddenly, the carriage shook violently, waking her up as she let out a cry of pain. Suddenly, the carriage shook with extreme violence, causing Ruella to lose her balance and strike her head forcefully against the carriage wall. She cried out in pain, clutching her head, while the door swung open quickly to reveal the driver with terrified features, asking about his mistress's condition and whether she had been harmed. Ruella reassured him that she was fine despite the pain, but she asked him sharply and anxiously about the source of the screaming she had just heard outside, fearing that a traffic accident had occurred. So the driver began to stammer as he tried to explain the situation to her. Outside, there was a man wearing an orange coat firmly grasping the hand of a girl dressed in a robe resembling a priest's outfit, while the girl was screaming and pleading with him to leave her alone. However, the man falsely accused her of being the one who harassed him first, claiming she was now feigning rejection to play hard to get, while the girl strongly denied this, insisting she had only picked up something he had dropped. The driver and Ruella got out of the carriage to clarify the matter, as the driver pointed toward those people who had suddenly jumped in front of the carriage, while Ruella watched the scene with features filled with wonder. As soon as Ruella grasped the situation, signs of anger and disgust appeared on her face, inwardly describing the man as despicable and insane. This situation reminded her of bad memories from her past life when she worked part-time in a store and dealt with troublemaking customers. She recalled a memory of an insolent customer who misunderstood her professional kindness as personal admiration, claiming she was interested in him, while she was actually just doing her job by ringing up his purchases, and she remembered how the matter ended with him being kicked out. Ruella returned to reality and told her driver in a firm tone to wait where he was for a moment, while she headed with confident steps toward the source of the quarrel. The man was still holding the girl and threatening her that he would not be lenient if she continued to behave this way, claiming she was blowing things out of proportion unnecessarily, without noticing Ruella, who approached him from behind. Without prior warning, Ruella brought her fist down hard on the back of the man's head, causing him to stagger from the force of the sudden blow. The man turned around angrily while clutching his head, shouting in bewilderment about the bold person who dared to strike a count like him, and rebuking her sharply for her lack of manners in dealing with nobles, questioning the kind of upbringing she had received. Ruella looked at him coldly and without a shred of fear, simply introducing herself as a noble lady, defiantly asking what he was going to do about it. As soon as the Count looked closely at her face, his features changed from anger to shock and terror, and he gasped her name, Lady Breda. in a trembling voice, while the other girl looked at her in astonishment as well. The Count tried to retreat and rectify the situation by stammering, saying there was no need for an introduction. But Ruella interrupted him with biting sarcasm, pointing out that he seemed very curious about the methods of upbringing in the Duke's house just a moment ago. Then Ruella smiled a terrifying smile full of menace, offering to personally tell the Duke in detail what had happened, mockingly suggesting they go to her house together now to discuss the matter. The Count's face turned pale and he broke into a sweat, beginning to tremble with intense fear at her explicit threat, unable to respond. Unable to bear the situation any longer, he took to his heels, screaming apologies and begging for forgiveness, leaving the place at a frantic speed while Ruella and the girl watched his disgraceful escape. Ruella brushed off her hands and muttered in annoyance that the man had caused a great fuss for no reason, expressing her resentment toward the whole situation. Suddenly, she heard a thumping sound behind her. She turned to find the girl had fallen to her knees, and Ruella thought the girl's legs had failed her due to the intense panic she had experienced. Ruella leaned toward her with concern and asked if she was okay after that annoying situation, offering her help to stand up once more. The girl was trembling as she muttered incoherent words about her disbelief at what was happening and that she never imagined meeting her here. Suddenly, she grabbed Ruella's hand firmly and shouted the title, Saint, loudly, much to Ruella's surprise. The girl raised her head, her eyes shining brightly, and expressed her overwhelming joy at meeting Ruella, enthusiastically declaring that she was one of her greatest fans. Ruella froze in her place, bewilderment covering her face, unable to process what she was hearing, and wondered in confusion about what was happening. Ruella began examining the girl's clothes, noticing she was wearing the uniform of an apprentice priestess, which increased her wonder, as she assumed that people belonging to the temple should hate her given Ruella's tyrannical behavior in the past. But the girl continued her speech with unparalleled enthusiasm while holding Ruella's hand, considering this meeting a great honor and glory for her family. She continued to heap praise on Ruella's beauty, which was still as radiant as ever, describing her heart as kind for saving a stranger like her from a bad man, and insisting that she was the saint of saints. Ruella thanked her shyly and in confusion, thinking to herself that it was the first time she had received such a welcome since meeting the high priest, making the situation somewhat embarrassing. Before the girl suddenly remembered something and began searching in her pocket, the girl pulled out a small statue and displayed it proudly, saying it was a statue she had made herself in Ruella's likeness. Ruella was stunned and asked in shock if she was truly the one who had made this statue, to which the girl replied with humility and shyness that her skills were still somewhat lacking. Ruella took the statue and contemplated it with great admiration, inwardly objecting to the girl's description of her skill as lacking. She saw that the design was sophisticated and the finishing touch was smooth and perfect, considering it a work of an incredible professional level. Ruella realized she had found her long-sought prize to carve the fountain, so she eagerly asked the girl for her name, and the girl answered with enthusiasm and happiness that her name was Hamel. Ruella surprised the apprentice priestess Hamel by approaching her, which drew a cry of surprise from Hamel, who did not expect this sudden move. With looks full of enthusiasm and confidence, Ruella offered Hamel to be her private sculptor. She realized in her heart that Hamel's talent was exactly what she needed to perfect the statue of the goddess Lucera for the fountain. Considering this meeting a stroke of good luck, Hamel was stunned by this unexpected offer, asking in shock if it was possible for her to become the saint's sculptor, which Ruella confirmed with enthusiasm and determination. Although Hamel described the offer as wonderful and expressed her desire to accept it, she seemed hesitant. She apologized to the saint, saying she couldn't do it, which left Ruella in complete confusion, wondering about the reason for this sudden refusal. Her confusion was interrupted by the voice of her driver, who approached her with concern, suggesting they leave soon. Only then did Ruella notice that her sitting with an apprentice priestess in the middle of the street had attracted the eyes of passers-by, who began to gather and whisper around them. Ruella realized then that the situation had become inappropriate, and inwardly blamed herself for being so dazzled by the quality of the statue that she had completely forgotten where they were. To resolve the situation, Ruella called to Hamel and invited her to accompany her to her palace so they could talk comfortably, explaining that she wanted to know more about her. Hamel met this with surprise and overwhelming joy, declaring her immediate agreement and readiness to follow her anywhere. As they were walking, Ruella thought that Hamel seemed to have a very friendly personality, but she marveled at her refusal of the job offer. She wondered if there was a hidden story behind this decision of hers. At the Duke's palace, Hamel seemed extremely nervous as she sipped tea with the saint, to the point that her hands did not stop trembling. She felt as if she were in a dream, so Ruella kindly asked her to calm down so she wouldn't spill the tea. Hamel asked Ruella to speak comfortably. Then Ruella asked her directly about the reason for her refusal to be her sculptor. She explained that she didn't blame her, but felt curious because she expected her to accept after she had expressed her admiration for her, and reassured her that there was no need to answer if the reason was embarrassing. After a short hesitation, Hamel decided to tell her the truth, considering the matter a bit embarrassing, but she would trust the saint. Hamel began her speech explaining that, as evident from her clothes, she was an apprentice priestess. But before that, she was a mage belonging to the magic tower. Surprise hit Ruella upon hearing this information, and she wondered in astonishment if she was truly a mage from the magic tower. Hamel's memory returned to her previous life as a talented mage with vast magical knowledge, where she loved conducting magical research in the tower. But life there wasn't perfect, as the mages were so obsessed with their research that they completely neglected themselves. They would spend days without sleep to finish their work. As a result of this neglect, the atmosphere in the tower was so filthy that the smell of mold wafted everywhere. In the end, Hamel could no longer bear that disgusting environment, so she decided to leave and escaped from the magic tower. A few months after her departure, Hamel found herself barely earning her daily bread by wandering through villages and doing strange and scattered odd jobs. Her money was running out quickly, making her feel anxious about her future. Hamel realized she could not continue this unstable life and that she must look for a steady job soon. As she was walking down a street, she noticed a large crowd of people and wondered about the reason for this gathering. She soon realized that the crowd was celebrating the passing of the new saint's procession, congratulating her, only to discover that the saint was none other than Ruella. Hamel thought, as she watched Saint Ruella's procession, that people were imploring her to light their way. She concluded that this was the new saint she had heard about. She was dazzled by her unparalleled beauty and felt a divine aura surrounding her. Unlike the mages she had left behind in the tower, an overwhelming desire grew in her heart to be by her side, so she made a fateful decision. Hamel declared in her heart that she would become a priestess, and all of this was for the sake of the saint. Thus, after falling in love with Ruella at first sight, Hamel headed to the temple and pleaded with them to accept her as a priestess. That's how she got a steady job as an apprentice priestess. She spent happy days practicing her new secret hobby, which was carving small statues, and felt pride every time she made a better statue than the previous one. But she overlooked an important fact. Art doesn't pay the bills. She soon found herself having spent all her money on sculpting materials, becoming more broke than before. As she was walking in confusion, wondering what she should do, and despite her unwillingness to give up the hobby of making statues of the saint, she spotted an advertisement on the wall promising to lend money. Her narrative was interrupted by Ruella's sudden voice shouting for her to stop, asking what had just happened, which sparked Hamel's wonder. Ruella was fuming when she saw that the interest rate in the advertisement was 150%, which was an exorbitant and illegal amount, and she anxiously asked Hamel if she had borrowed money from them. Hamel shamefully admitted that she couldn't resist for the sake of the statues, and that she had indeed borrowed money from them. Ruella felt sorrow and blamed Hamel for her foolishness. Hamel explained that she was in a state of daze at that time, but now she was tied to them after having already borrowed the money, and she couldn't even pay a small part of the interest. She added that if she stayed by the saint's side in this situation, it would harm her reputation. Ruella sighed and finally realized the reason for Hamel's refusal of her offer, and understood the situation perfectly. But she suddenly rose from her place with determined looks and declared that she couldn't simply give up on her. She repeated her offer once more, asking Hamel to inform her that she would be the sculptor of her fountain. With a confident smile, she promised her that in return she would get rid of that illegal loan company. Hamel was shocked and asked in bewilderment if she truly meant that she would pay off her debt. Ruella confirmed that she wouldn't just pay off the debt, but would wipe that moneylender off the map entirely. However, Hamel refused, saying she couldn't allow the saint to go through all this trouble for her sake. Ruella reassured her that this wasn't trouble but an investment, and that such an investment is necessary when hiring talent. Ruella wondered if Hamel agreed with her, pointing out that they were committing their crimes openly without being caught, and that reporting them must be useless, which Hamel confirmed, explaining that they had been investigated several times but to no avail. Ruella concluded that they were very careful to hide anything that might incriminate them, and that obtaining physical evidence would be wonderful. She asked Hamel to tell her everything she knew about that moneylender, from location and interior design to everything else. But Hamel apologized that she didn't know much because she only went there to borrow money. Suddenly, Hamel remembered something and said she saw a man coming out of there. The man was carrying something precious, and at first glance, it looked like a document envelope. Ruella's eyes sparkled, and she realized this was the thread she was looking for. She shouted that the place the man was heading toward must be the place where real evidence is gathered. Ruella grabbed Hamel and shook her enthusiastically, eagerly asking where that man had gone, making Hamel stammer from the sudden closeness. Hamel asked Ruella to step back a little, promising her to tell her everything. In another distant place where darkness shrouded a massive wooden building located deep in a desolate forest, A suspicious exchange was taking place in secret. One person handed over a document case to a masked man, wondering if these were the records for the current year, and emphasizing the need to tighten control over the documents to avoid sparking any unjustified investigations. The blonde-haired man replied, confirming with a wicked smile that he was well aware of that, boasting that he had never made a mistake in his work, asking his colleague to leave the whole matter in his hands. The other man laughed, interrupting him and acknowledging the truth of his words, then allowed him to enter the building. Meanwhile, from behind the nearby trees, Crown Prince Hildian and his assistant Heston were watching the scene disguised in dark cloaks. Heston whispered to his master, asking if he had heard the talk about the transaction ledger, and Hildian nodded his head, confirming he had heard it perfectly clearly. Heston smiled, considering that luck was on their side and that they would finally be able to throw these criminals behind bars in a short time. However, Hildian warned him against slackness, pointing out that if the matter were that easy, they would have been caught long ago while they watched the masked man preparing his horse. The Crown Prince stressed the need for extreme caution, reminding his assistant that the primary goal of their coming to this dangerous place was to find conclusive evidence beyond doubt in order to destroy this pawn shop, once and for all. The Crown Prince's memory went back a little to when he was in his office at the palace. Heston informed him that despite their success in cleaning the streets of the Bastion area to a large extent, there were still places that required firm intervention. The assistant explained that one of these places was located on the outskirts of the Vention area, a site of great standing in the underworld known as Hambar Pawn Shop, which looks like an isolated wooden building in the middle of the forest. Heston continued his explanation that this illegal shop had received many reports in the past, but the problem lay in not finding any evidence incriminating them during inspections, which leads to the immediate release of suspects, forming a constant source of annoyance for the authorities. Hildian sighed, expressing his surprise at the existence of another place rivaling Sharon's area in malice and corruption, and asked his assistant about the number of victims who fell into this shop's trap. Heston answered seriously that their numbers were approximately equal to the size of 3 villages, which struck the Crown Prince with extreme shock at the magnitude of the number he had not expected. The assistant added that most of the patrons of this shop were people suffering from financial hardship and struggling to meet their basic needs. Hildian wondered if they had investigated these victims, assuming that would inevitably reveal some information about the shop. Heston swallowed hard and signs of tension appeared on him, replying that he truly wanted that, but for an unknown and suspicious reason. Most of those victims had completely disappeared, which made Hildian jump from his place, shocked by the magnitude of the disaster. Heston confirmed that it was illogical for this huge number of people to disappear at once, concluding that the pawn shop was directly responsible for that, and that they didn't just collect money illegally, but were also taking people's lives. Hildian realized the seriousness of the situation, acknowledging that this case had exceeded the scope that could be left to ordinary knights, warning that the damage would become irreparable if it extended outside the imperial lands. In his heart, there was another motive driving Hildian. He remembered that the Vention area was the same place he recommended to Lady Ruella to build her fountain, and he felt extreme concern about the possibility of her coming to any harm because of these criminals, even if the shop was located on the outskirts of the area. Accordingly, the Crown Prince rose firmly and issued a definitive order to his assistant to prepare to move immediately toward the site, vowing that he would go himself to look for the decisive evidence that would enable them to trap these scoundrels. Returning to the present in the dark forest, Heston noticed the sound of a horse neighing and informed the Crown Prince that the suspects had begun to move and leave. Hildian watched the two men, wondering about their destination with those important documents, then ordered his assistant that they must track the first man immediately, making sure the horses were ready to set off, which Heston confirmed. The two mounted their horses and delved into a vast and sprawling cornfield, surrounded by tall plants in every direction under the cover of darkness. Heston stopped suddenly, pointing out that the man they were tracking had entered this place, where there were clear footprints leading inside the dense field. The Crown Prince concluded that the criminals were hiding their illegal documents in this secret place, and smartly noticed that the corn stalks and leaves looked unnaturally huge compared to the size of the weak ears, as if they were planted for another purpose. Hildian realized while contemplating the dense plant wall that this field was not planted for harvest, but was specifically designed as a natural wall to hide something behind it. The Crown Prince felt wonder at the existence of such a secret and cleverly hidden place, acknowledging to himself that he would have to pay more attention to imperial security from now on. He told Heston that he would enter on foot, so the assistant followed him immediately through the thick grass. As they were making their way with difficulty through the dark field, Hildian noticed that they had walked a long distance without the end looming on the horizon, confirming that this place was so isolated that no one would notice anything, even if a crime occurred here. Finally, after the struggle of searching, the dense plants opened up to reveal an old wooden building carefully hidden. So Heston whispered to the crown prince enthusiastically, confirming that this was undoubtedly the sought-after place. The masked man they were tracking reached his destination and stopped in front of the wooden building. Hildian and his assistant Heston watched the man from their hiding place in the middle of the dense cornfield. Heston suggested catching up with him, but the crown prince stopped him, preferring to wait and watch until the man came out, given their ignorance of who might be inside. In the midst of their anticipation, the sound of faint footsteps approaching from behind reached Hildian's ears. He turned quickly and warily, wondering to himself if the newcomer was another partner of the pawnshop gang. But his surprise was extreme when he glimpsed pink strands of hair cascading from under the newcomer's hood, realizing with shock that it was Lady Ruella in the flesh. Ruella was sneaking with extreme caution while Hildian watched her in confusion, wondering about the reason for her presence in this dangerous place and whether she had received a new divine prophecy that led her here, while Ruella realized in her heart the seriousness of the situation and thought about the need to retreat. Meanwhile, one of the criminals was talking with his partner, within the building's range, reassuring him that things were going well and confirming he had received advance news of bringing the required documents to this place. The bald man warned his colleague against being tracked, stressing that losing those records meant their inevitable end. But the man with the scar laughed recklessly, asserting that even if someone followed them, they would simply get rid of them. Hildian listened to this dialogue with features cloaked in seriousness, certain that these were indeed the sought-after pawnshop gang members. Hildian concluded strongly that Lady Ruella was standing in the path of these dangerous criminals, thinking she would face certain danger if things continued this way. For her part, Ruella continued her advance cautiously, thinking that despite her conclusion of the location based on Hamel's description, she never imagined the existence of a secret palace hidden in a desolate place like this. Ruella gathered her courage, believing in the existence of something in this place that could be used as conclusive evidence against the pawnshop, and decided to enter with extreme caution. Ruella hid behind one of the walls to eavesdrop, where her ears caught the criminals' talk about the importance of the ledgers, and that losing them meant their destruction, in addition to their boasting of their ability to get rid of anyone who dared to track them. Suddenly, Ruella felt movement behind her. She turned terrified to realize that someone was standing outside, and panic took hold of her because there was no place she could hide in that critical moment. The two criminals approached her location, and it seemed that her exposure had become a matter of time. In the moment she was about to be exposed, a hand suddenly extended from the darkness to grab her, making her gasp in terror and surprise. This faint sound caught the attention of the man with the scar. He stopped in his tracks and looked toward the cornfield, asking sharply who was hiding there. The two men drew their daggers quickly and began looking around warily, searching for any trace of a potential intruder. The man with the scar kept watching the field for some time, but he heard nothing but the rustling of leaves, so he concluded he had misheard. The man justified the matter by saying the sound was nothing but the rustling of corn due to the wind, and asked his colleague not to scare him like that. Meanwhile, Hildian was hiding inside, holding Ruella and covering her mouth with his hand to prevent her from making any sound. Ruella felt immense relief at the passing of the imminent danger, wondering in her heart about the identity of the savior who intervened at the right time. She raised her head to be surprised by Hildian's features, wondering in bewilderment how he knew her location and came here. The two criminals decided to leave to look for some drink, so they withdrew from the place, and only then did Hildian move his hand away from Ruella's mouth, apologizing to her gently. Ruella moved away from him quickly while catching her breath, calling him by his royal title in a state of shock, asking why he had come to this place. Hildian stated firmly that he was the one entitled to ask this question, pointing out that he had come with his assistant to investigate an important matter, and rebuking her for being here, wondering if she realized the danger of the place she was standing in. Ruella defended herself, insisting that she fully realized her location and that she hadn't gotten lost to arrive here. Hildian returned to ask her persistently about the real goal of her visit. Ruella was flustered and began to stammer, realizing in her heart that she could in no way tell him the truth, which was that she came to destroy the pawnshop that exploited her future sculptor with unfair debts, just so she could hire her. To get out of this predicament, Ruella feigned features of reverence and solemnity, and brilliantly claimed that she came in response to a call from the goddess Lucera, claiming she received a divine prophecy ordering her to purify the evil pawnshop that was wreaking havoc in the empire. Hildian was surprised by her speech and muttered in shock, wondering about this purification matter, and marveling at her receiving another prophecy in this short time after the Bastion area incident, while Ruella continued playing the role of the obedient saint. Hildian lowered his gaze and felt a heavy burden, thinking that the succession of prophecies to the saint in this rapid manner indicates the extent of disturbance and instability the Empire is suffering from, and considered this matter an embarrassment and a major shortcoming on his part as the Crown Prince. With all seriousness, Hildian pledged before her that he would give the Empire more attention and care from now on. Ruella agreed with him hesitantly and in confusion, while she was breathing a sigh of relief in her heart for the success of her lie, despite her wonder at his quick belief in her and his extreme influence by her words. Heston told the Crown Prince that the two men had disappeared behind the cornfield. Hildian decided to stay in place to search for evidence, while he issued his order to his assistant to accompany the lady out and then catch up with them, which sparked Ruella's shock as she hadn't expected this decision. With a quick and sudden move, Ruella grabbed the Crown Prince's arm firmly, refusing to leave, which sparked his extreme surprise. Ruella insisted on her position, asserting that she couldn't leave now. She remembered in her heart how she had boasted before Hamel that she would solve this problem herself, and she couldn't retreat now. Hildian warned her of the seriousness of the situation, pleading with her to leave the matter to them and go back, but she asserted her ability to protect herself, using the excuse that she couldn't retreat because of the divine prophecy she had received, and begged him to allow her to accompany him, promising she wouldn't be an obstacle in his path. She looked at him with tearful eyes and begged him not to ask her to return, justifying her persistence in her heart by saying that if she retreated now, she would lose the sculptor she was looking for, and that pride didn't matter at this moment. Hildian was flustered before her pleading looks and felt his heart rate quicken, so he finally surrendered and agreed to her request with a deep sigh. He kindly asked her to let go of his arm. She apologized and released him quickly, while Heston watched the situation with a cunning smile, thinking about how the majestic Crown Prince loses his composure before the saint. Ruella noticed the redness of his face and wondered if she had committed some mistake, but she soon smiled, expressing her happiness at their ability to investigate together. Heston approached the Crown Prince teasingly and inquiring if he was happy with this development. Hildian got angry and ordered him to be silent and hurry to move, trying to hide his shyness. Ruella and Hildian sneaked cautiously into the building and noticed that no one was inside, wondering in a whisper about the fate of the two guards who were outside a while ago. They entered the dark building quietly, and Hildian concluded that the criminals had not appointed many guards given the hidden location of the building deep in the forest. Hildian began looking around for the extra man they saw earlier, wondering where he might have gone. Ruella thought that their staying for a long time inside this secret palace would be fraught with danger if that man was still inside, and suggested they find the evidence incriminating the pawn shop and leave quickly before being discovered. They stood in front of one of the rooms, and Hildian suggested they begin searching it first. As soon as they entered, they found a huge amount of scattered documents, so they immediately realized that these were the illegal records they were looking for. Hildian leafed through some papers and discovered they were mixed with fake documents, stressing the need to take only conclusive evidence to ensure they were trapped. Ruella nodded her head in agreement and told him she would search the bookshelves. Ruella pulled out one of the ledgers and began reading it, to be shocked by the presence of imaginary interest rates reaching 65% and 70%, so she fumed at the greed of these scoundrels and their ugly exploitation of the general public. As she was turning the pages, something strange written next to the financial amounts caught her attention. A note was written referring to providing borrowers with extra blue pills, with instructions to take 1 pill daily, increasing to 2 pills in the following month. Ruella inquired of the Crown Prince about the nature of these blue pills, wondering if they were a type of medicine, and pointing out that this note was repeated in the files of everyone who renewed their contracts. Hildian approached to examine the ledger and admitted that he hadn't seen this type of medication before. Hildian concluded dangerously that this gang might be manufacturing and selling drugs illegally and forcing borrowers to take them to trap them in the trap of addiction. Hildian decided to take this ledger as additional evidence, considering that what they obtained was enough as proof, and suggested leaving immediately. But at that moment, they heard the sound of footsteps approaching, accompanied by a sigh of relief from someone complaining about his urgent need to use the restroom. So the two jumped and hid quickly. The blonde-haired man entered the room wondering about the reason for the gang leader's absence despite his safe return, assuming they had gone out to consume more alcohol. The man ignored the matter, declaring he felt hungry, and decided to leave the documents he was carrying on the desk and leave, convinced his companions would return soon. But before leaving, he stopped suddenly and noticed that something was wrong. The documents appeared more scattered than usual, and there were clear gaps on the bookshelves. The man turned around quickly, signs of anger and suspicion covering his face, shouting that there was an intruder in the place. The man looked around and shouted sharply, asking for the identity of the one hiding, and demanding that they reveal themselves immediately. Hildian and Ruella hid from the man who was shouting outside, demanding they come out immediately and wondering if the gang leaders would overlook this intrusion. Due to the narrowness of the space, they had to stand very close together, which made Ruella feel embarrassed and think that the distance between them was too close, while Hildian's heart was beating clearly. Although they realized their hiding was in a hurry, Hildian felt how exaggeratedly close they were, while Ruella feared he could hear her heartbeats from the intensity of the contact. Ruella tried to reassure herself that the current situation left them no other choice, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that the heartbeats she was hearing were increasing in strength and noise. She soon realized that this rapid pulse did not belong to her, but was coming from Hildian's heart, who appeared tense and red-faced. Ruella felt concerned about him, so she placed her hand on his chest, wondering in a whisper if he was suffering from oxygen deficiency due to his heart beating in this insane way. Hildian tried to deny that and confirmed to her that he was fine and that the matter wasn't as she thought, but a sudden move led to them getting closer, making him let out a faint moan from the intensity of the confusion. Hildian retreated quickly, apologizing with extreme shyness, so Ruella, in turn, initiated an apology, stressing that she was the one who rushed in her behavior. Hildian asked her with a suppressed smile to bear the situation a little until the man who was still searching for them in the vicinity left, so Ruella immediately agreed. In those moments, Ruella began to feel that her heart started beating strongly too, and she wondered in confusion mixed with shyness if she had been infected with tension from Hildian. Outside, the man decided to head to search in another room. He set off quickly and opened the door violently, inwardly condemning the recklessness of these people and their storming of the place without the slightest concern for their lives. The sound of the man's footsteps and his threat that he wouldn't show them mercy if they fell into his grip faded, to return complete calm to the room. The two peeked from their hiding place cautiously, and Hildian confirmed that the man had indeed left the room, so Ruella breathed a sigh of relief that they weren't exposed. Hildian approached cautiously to leave the place carefully before anyone noticed their absence, especially since they had gathered enough evidence and asked her to follow him, so she obeyed willingly. But before moving away, she was stopped by the sudden appearance of a warning system window, informing her of hearing a suspicious sound behind the cupboard and giving her the choice between checking the matter or ignoring it. Ruella stopped the Crown Prince and asked him to wait for a moment. He turned, wondering about the reason. Ruella approached the wooden cupboard with curiosity and told him she believed there was a sound coming from behind it. She explained that she felt a light air current, which indicates the existence of an empty space, and noticed the existence of a gap behind the cupboard, confirming her suspicions. Hildian stepped forward firmly, showing his readiness to check the matter himself. With force, Hildian pushed the heavy cupboard aside, while Ruella was anticipating what would appear behind it. Behind the cupboard, a secret and dark stone passage was revealed, which sparked their surprise. Hildian expressed his wonder at the gang building such a suspicious secret passage in this way, and they stood together contemplating the mysterious entrance. Ruella concluded that this passage was not known to everyone, and the proof was that the man who was searching for them did not check it. She admitted in her heart that the credit for discovering it belongs entirely to the system window. Hildian deduced from that the gang was hiding something of paramount importance below, far from the eyes of its regular members. He asked her if she wanted to discover what this cellar was hiding, so Ruella enthusiastically agreed. They began descending cautiously through long and dark stone steps. Ruella noticed that the passage extended deep underground more than she expected, wondering about its end. She wondered in concern about the nature of the secret they were hiding with all this care, praying it wouldn't be something very bad. When they reached the end of the stairs, her eyes widened in shock at the sight of iron cells in a dark and gloomy place. Wondering in fear if this place was a prison, suddenly a red system window appeared before her, accompanied by a sharp alarm sound. The window carried an urgent danger message warning of the gathering of insects and ordering her of the need to eliminate them, leaving Ruella in a state of confusion and concern about the real meaning of this terrifying warning. Despite the warning that appeared before her of the gathering of insects, calm prevailed in the place. But suddenly, a strange hand extended from the middle of the darkness toward her. Ruella noticed the hand that almost reached her, so she froze in her place. In that critical moment, Hildian shouted, calling her. With a quick move, Hildian lunged at her and pulled her away to protect her from the hand that pierced the bars. Ruella screamed in panic from the horror of the surprise. After she grasped what happened, she wondered in bewilderment about what that thing was. to realize with fear that it was a human person. When they raised their gazes, they were surprised by the presence of a group of people held behind iron bars, moaning and extending their hands toward them. She realized the matter wasn't limited to just one person. Hildian drew his sword quickly and stood before her to protect her, warning her that the bars were about to collapse, and asked her to retreat to the back so he could deal with the situation. Ruella felt some reassurance by his presence, convinced that his power was enough to topple them all without being harmed. But suddenly, a new alarm bell rang in her head. Successive red warning windows appeared surrounding her from every side, announcing intensely and critically the gathering of insects in large numbers. The warnings explained that these insects are attracted toward the energy of the evil god Ahotep, warning that if large numbers of them reached Hildian, he would lose control of himself and enter a state of rage and madness. The window demanded Ruella of the need to eliminate those insects immediately to prevent this disaster. While Hildian stood alert in front of the cell, Ruella realized then that the divine prophecy meant the real danger lies in these insects, and she wondered in terror about the reason for their presence in abundance in this cellar. Meanwhile, the bars began to twist and make sounds warning of their breaking. Hildian asked Ruella to hurry out and leave the matter to him to deal with them. But Ruella strongly refused and shouted, demanding him to leave first, which struck him with shock and extreme wonder. Ruella justified her persistence in her heart by saying that the insects touching him would lead him to rage, which would cause an unpraiseworthy disaster. She claimed loudly that she had just listened to the voice of the goddess, and that this matter was her duty and not his business. Hildian opposed her speech, considering that the intervention of the divine voice in this situation means the danger is greater than it seems, which gives him a greater motive to stay and help her. Ruella completely lost her temper, asserting to him that his staying would only lead to increasing things for the worse and the aggravation of the crisis. Before they finished their argument, a massive crashing sound was heard, and the two were surprised by the collapse of the iron door of the cell. The detained men rushed like madmen toward the outside after the bars were finally broken. In that moment of panic, Ruella shouted, asking the Crown Prince to retreat to the back. Despite Ruella's feigning of courage and control of the situation, she acknowledged in her heart the difficulty of the predicament, realizing she possessed the ability to repel small insects only. But she had never before dealt with this huge and terrifying number of infected people surrounded by the dark insect energy, who began to attack them brutally.